Down in the depths of Facility 23, a group of scientists stand before a massive rumbling piece of machinery. They all hold their breath as the gigantic mechanism suddenly stops. It's eerily quiet for a moment before a door slides open. The scientists crane their necks to see inside, to see what the result of their great experiment was. These were some of the greatest minds in the SCP Foundation, but nothing could prepare them for what they had created. September 9, 2008 was an unseasonably frosty day when Dr. Charles Gears, one of the SCP Foundation's most iconic scientists, parked his Honda Civic outside of what seemed like an innocuous government cold storage warehouse. He sipped his coffee and surveyed the building, which he, along with about 100 others in total, knew to be Site 19, Facility 23. Why was Dr. Gears, former director of all Euclid-level containment at Site 19, here today? Because official testing was about to begin on SCP-914. The Foundation had acquired the machine now known as SCP-914 some time ago, but only after its recent reclassification to 914 had it been relocated to Facility 23. It must have been important because the entirety of the facility was being repurposed for SCP-914 research. They were dealing with an immensely complicated piece of anomalous technology here, and the same question was on everybody's lips. What exactly does this thing do? Dr. Arthur Hackett, the facility director, had requested the cold, clinical assistance of Dr. Gears in providing the answer. Once he'd finished his morning coffee, Dr. Gears headed inside. The facility's security chief, Agent Alan Sedna, had been beefing up security at the building, and at least 2 mobile task force units were already on call in case anything happened. The first day of official testing is always a crapshoot. You might get a nice drink out of it, like with SCP-294, or you may get an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. You never really know. All Dr. Gears knew, as he walked up the granite steps to the main entrance, was that he was already feeling exhausted. When you've dealt with anomalous objects and entities for decades on end, the sense of wonder and mystery begins to wear off, only to be replaced with a kind of tedium any office worker knows all too well. Everyone knew that Dr. Gears was devoted to the job, perhaps more than anyone else, but he approached the job with an emotionless effect. You wouldn't know from looking at him if he was thinking about the deadly anomalous creature in the next room, or what he was going to have for lunch that day. The doctor passed through security and was briefed in the break room by Dr. Lucius Veritas, Director of Research at Site 19. He explained that the machine seemed to work in the absence of any power source. Its mechanical structure is similar to machinery from the Industrial Revolution, but it's exceedingly complex for something constructed in that time. Foundation analyses into the structure of the 914 machine have shown it to have as many as 8 million moving parts, and that might even be an incomplete estimate. Dr. Gears wore his trademark blank face as he listened, solemnly nodded, and asked to be shown the anomaly. He was led into Containment Chamber 109B by a pair of guards. According to all current Foundation tests, the machine doesn't appear to pose any active risk of containment breach or danger to the guards, earning it the rare safe designation. As a result, aside from guards stationed on site, containment procedures for 914 were minimal. Whether this designation would need to be changed after testing was something Dr. Gears would soon find out. SCP-914 was a truly impressive sight to behold, a giant clockwork mechanism taking up around 18 square feet, with an unfathomably complex combination of screw drives, belts, pulleys, springs, and gears. A less stoic researcher might see the humor in recruiting a Dr. Gears to test such a device, but comedy definitely wasn't one of Dr. Gears' specialties. He stared at the machine with a detached fascination, analyzing its vital components at a glance. Gears noted a large mainspring beneath a rudimentary selection panel. The panel is copper, with a large selection knob fixed to an arrow above a series of different options: rough, coarse, 1-to-1, fine, and very fine. There was also a large key below the selection panel, for the purposes of winding up the mainspring and initiating whatever procedure this machine was designed to enact. Next, Dr. Gears noticed 2 large booths connected to the machine by a pair of equally large copper tubes. The booth on the left labeled Intake, and the right labeled Output. Incredibly, Dr. Gears was able to immediately deduce the purpose of this machine. It was designed to enact some kind of transformative process on whatever was placed into the intake booth. But what kind of transformative process? That's exactly what Dr. Gears was here to find out. The experiment was simple. They would gather a series of samples, both inanimate objects and living tissue, and use them to explore the different permutations of the 914 machine's transformative abilities. This initial series of experiments were approved by O5 Command and the site director, and with the 47 researchers present in Facility 23 at his disposal, Dr. Gears commenced his research into SCP-914. To minimize risk, Dr. Gears decided the first test would be a simple kilogram of steel. On his orders, the steel was placed into the intake booth. With the doctor's approval, a junior researcher set the control panel setting to rough and began twisting the mainspring key, at which point the booth's doors closed and a small bell inside chimed. The machine began to rumble, its 8 million working pieces churning into life. It continued like this for around 10 minutes before falling silent, at which point the output booth opened. What had once been a single lump of steel weighing 1 kilogram was now an uneven pile of smaller lumps, with evidence of laser cutting. Dr. Gears made note of the fact that having lasers within such a machine is both anachronistic and anomalous, and that the rough setting appears to messily cleave the object placed within the intake booth into pieces. Dr. Gears also noted that it would be unwise to test any kind of explosive material on the rough setting, unless of course they wanted to destroy the building. The research continued. Dr. Gears used another 1 kilogram lump of steel to test the 1-to-1 feature. This time the result was far more peculiar. The output booth contained the exact same weight in steel screws. This result was sparking even greater connections in Dr. Gears' impressive analytical mind. Firstly, the 1-to-1 feature caused the 914 machine to transform the output into something different from, but similar to, the intake. And while this would require further testing, it appeared that the 914 machine, despite being anomalous, does still follow the laws of physics. Samples passed through the machine conserve their mass and would not be transmuted on an atomic level from one element to another. Next, Dr. Gears pushed another lump of steel through the machine on the fine setting. The result this time was a kilogram of steel carpet tacks. From this, Dr. Gears was able to ascertain that the fine feature improves the samples placed within the intake booth somewhat. However, things got even stranger when Gears performed the same experiment on the very fine setting. The output booth provided several unknown gases and a lump of unknown metal with anomalous qualities. Namely, it was resistant to heat up to 50,000 degrees, impossible to bend or break with any force, and was a perfect conductor of electricity. Dr. Gears suddenly realized his task here may be more interesting than he'd initially imagined. Was that a bit of a smile on his face that one researcher spotted? Surely not. This was the famous unflappable Dr. Gears after all. The doctor decided to take it up a notch and began to test more complex items in the 914 machine. He removed his own wristwatch and placed it into the input booth before setting the machine to course and letting her rip. Literally, in this case. When the output booth was opened, the watch had been painstakingly disassembled into its component parts, with no damage to said parts. Dr. Gears noted the coarse feature as a more mild version of the rough, in the sense that it was able to take an object apart without any kind of fundamental damage. He also made note of the fact he'd need to get himself a new watch. Dr. Gears then asked one of the researchers to surrender their cell phone for testing. While none were excited at the prospect of their phone getting eviscerated by a Clockwork behemoth, one of the researchers eventually surrendered their BlackBerry Curve to the doctor. He placed it into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and 10 minutes later, the output booth released a brand new Apple iPhone. Sadly for the researcher who donated his BlackBerry, he wasn't allowed to keep the new device. Naturally, Dr. Gears was interested in trying out the anomalous, very fine setting on a more complex object. Seeing as no other researchers were eager to hand over their personal effects, he took a Colt Python revolver from a member of security and ran that through the machine on very fine. The result was an extremely powerful energy weapon containing gamma radiation, which fired a beam capable of disintegrating anything in its path. While the weapon's power was immense, it was also too dangerous and unstable to be added to the Foundation's armory for general use. Having collected a wealth of data from more complex objects, Dr. Gears was eager to move to the next stage, live test subjects. While his fellow researchers had some reservations, the experiments pushed on, beginning with mice. A single white mouse was put into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and the machine was activated. The result 5 minutes later was an almost identical creature, save for the fact that it now had brown fur. Encouraged by the fact that the mouse survived the refinery process, Dr. Gears next applied for the use of 2 chimps in his SCP-914 experiments. The first chimp was run through the machine on the fine setting. The result was a chimp of human-level intelligence, who has since begun working for the Foundation under the alias Dr. Bobo, and the data from this test has been expunged from the official reports to protect Dr. Bobo's privacy. The second primate test, this time on Ruff, was not quite as positive. The chimp was dismembered, with the mutilated corpse showing evidence of cutting from high heat and crushing. Of course, everyone knew where these tests were eventually going. Dr. Gears requested 2 members of D-Class personnel for testing. The first was a 42-year-old Caucasian male weighing 108 kilograms and standing 185 centimeters tall. Dr. Gears ran him through SCP-914 on the 1-to-1 setting, resulting in a slightly taller Hispanic man with a slightly lower body weight. He immediately became severely confused and agitated and attempted to attack the guards present, leading to his unfortunate termination by Foundation staff. It was on the final live test that tragedy truly struck. A 28-year-old Caucasian male was run through the machine on the highly anomalous Very Fine setting. The result was an utterly nightmarish creature. So horrifying that the majority of the details on its physical appearance have been expunged from the report. The creature made a sudden escape, breaching the relatively minor containment procedures intended for the inert SCP-914. This highly dangerous creature killed 8 guards, as well as 2 senior researchers upon emerging from the output booth. A special response team was dispatched to take the creature down, but that proved harder than expected. SCP-914 had massively improved upon the human original, especially when it came to its killing ability. Eventually, it was captured, but the special response team suffered injuries and memory loss as a result of the creature's anomalous powers. The creature was also severely wounded, and its blood caused corrosive damage to the plumbing in Facility 23. The creature expired from its injuries several hours later, turning into a cloud of blue ash that blinded a nearby research team. Dr. Gears would later comment that the experiments were ultimately still a success, in spite of some minor hiccups. Testing on the device continues to this day in an effort to understand the full potential of the machine. Though, for obvious reasons, biological testing on the machine has since been forbidden without direct authorization from O5 Command. After all, if an already dangerous SCP was ever subjected to the Very Fine transformation setting, we could be dealing with something beyond our greatest nightmares. It's universally acknowledged that working late always sucks. Even more so when you're working at the SCP Foundation. This unpleasant state of affairs was being experienced by junior researcher Jeffries on March 1st, 2018. His unenviable task was cataloging old digital files that hadn't yet been ported over to the Foundation's new system. Some researchers had to be put on SCP-682 detail. Others were wrangling D-classes into the femur breaker to lure SCP-106 during an escape attempt. Junior researcher Jeffries was probably lucky. The greatest threat he was facing was his coffee running out, or maybe dying of boredom. He had no idea that in the files on the numerous hard drives in front of him, a nightmare was waiting. Something that would not only ruin his night, but potentially rewrite his very understanding of reality itself, even if he survived. What he found was a file marked Document 1763-EX001, created on December 2nd, 1984. Strange. He double-checked the files and found that the Foundation already had an anomaly in the 1763 spot, an interdimensional portal on Wall Street that showcased bizarre performance art, and he didn't have any records that showed a prior SCP-1763 had ever been explained, and thus removed from the roster. There was only one thing to do. He'd pour himself another tall cup of black coffee and get to work. Another leap down the rabbit hole, but this time, he didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went. Back in 1984, a strange man in an unknown uniform visited a pig farm. He bought 40 of the farmer's largest swine and carted them off to some unknown purpose. Pig farmers are famous for not asking questions they don't want to know the answer to. Bad for business, you see. so this silent arrangement of money changing hands suited them just fine. These pigs, as it turned out, had just been obtained by the SCP Foundation and taken to a containment site in the wilderness about 80 miles away from that very pig farm. You can only imagine the amount of meat that it takes to feed some of the carnivorous anomalies that the Foundation had on site, and these pigs were intended to satisfy the appetite of just one of them, a creature that had first been captured over in the fields of England, where it terrorized the countryside, making livestock and farmers mysteriously disappear by the dozen. Naturally, the Foundation caught wind of the disappearances, worrying that the news could cause a panic if ever someone in the non-anomalous world realized what was happening. They spread false information about accidental deaths and diseases, muddled the waters, and did everything they could to prevent Britain at large from knowing there was a rampaging monster on the loose. Speaking of, the creature itself was huge, at least at the time of capture, 12 meters long, but it had proven exceptionally hard to catch for Foundation field agents stationed in the area. This was due to its primary anomalous capability, a unique form of camouflage that worked by altering the very perspectives of people around it. The more time the creature spent in any one location, both the larger it seemed to become and the harder it was to perceive. They were only able to capture it in the end by using a form of sedative gas that locked it into perceptibility, before carting it into a secure containment vehicle and taking it to the nearest containment site for analysis. This happened to be a little place called Site 94. There, a large containment area was devised, and it was placed inside, with motion sensor deployments of that very same sedative gas should it ever attempt to escape. And it was only a matter of when, not if. 30 members of Foundation personnel had already been killed by the creature since it was first contained. The pigs were taken to a different containment area. One would be taken each day and led with a leash down a long hall towards the secure containment ward, where the entity, now dubbed as SCP-1763, was waiting to be fed in its cell. Agent Harker was the one on duty this time, leading the pig along. He felt sorry for it almost. It had lived a full life up to this point. He'd read somewhere that pigs were highly intelligent animals. Most of them were as smart as a human child. And now it was just going to be dinner for some incomprehensible entity. What a way to end your life. His musings on the natures of the pig's life were quickly cut off by a horrifying sight. He reached the containment chamber and found it empty. The door, only big enough for a human to pass through, was ajar. Had it escaped? He'd read the file. The creature could alter its morphology. Sure, it typically got bigger, but what if it could make itself smaller? It could fit through the gate and be causing chaos around the facility right now. Agent Harker, in a blind panic, stepped into the containment chamber to assess the situation, and in that moment, his life was over. In the space of a scant few seconds, the air around him seemed to shimmer, as though something was moving that he couldn't quite see. Then, he felt the crushing bite force of jaws closing around his torso, with such strength that the air was pushed out of his lungs. Then, unable to scream, he was dragged back into the containment chamber, and the creature started eating, still completely unseen. Blood splattered the walls and pooled on the floor. When the other agents and guards arrived, they found the cell empty, save for all the blood and a confused pig wandering the halls. It seemed that the unidentified anomalous entity was far more intelligent a predator than they first realized. And worse still, on the rare occasions that the Foundation could see it, it was getting bigger. The second iteration of the file that junior researcher Jeffries read, dated 1989 this time, illustrated that the Foundation had taken a substantial leap in the caution of their containment procedures. Mere sedative gas wasn't enough. They also added corrosive fluid emitters in hopes of physically destroying the creature if it ever tried to harm Foundation personnel again. They also upped its daily diet to 2 adult pigs in hopes to sate the hunger that was becoming an ever-present danger to all personnel working in the sector. But seemingly in tandem with the improvements in security, the creature just kept getting more advanced, more dangerous, particularly in its anomalous mimetic camouflage. It was now 18 meters long, large enough that it could physically overpower anyone that it wanted to prey on. And now, it was able to selectively disguise both its appearance and sounds, making it effectively impossible to detect if you're the one it's after. Its adaptive abilities for stealth now seemed to accelerate at a constant rate, making its perceptibility as unpredictable as its morphology. And it was about to get so much worse. For reasons that were at the time unknown, the Foundation decided to dismantle the containment chamber at Site 94 where the beast was being held. The reason for this seemingly nonsensical action would become clear later, but what was immediately obvious were the consequences of letting the creature loose inside the site. In the space of a single day, hundreds of SCP Foundation personnel were killed. They were just standing around going about their day as the ginormous, imperceptible creature approached them. They didn't even realize anything was happening until the jaws closed around them, just like Agent Harker had experienced all that time before. The break room turned into a bloodbath. All that terrible screaming. The most frightening part was that none of these Foundation employees were able to fight back, despite so many of them being armed and dangerous, in theory. But how can you fight back against something that you don't even know is there? Because this was more than just not being able to perceive that the creature was there. Everyone somehow simply knew that it wasn't. In the same way you know there isn't a giant pink elephant floating above you right now. It seemed that the power of SCP-1763's mimetic camo was now so powerful that it could reach into the minds of everyone around it and edit their thoughts, removing itself and even its victims. That's why the unfortunate staff of Site-94 deconstructed its containment chamber in the first place. In their minds, it was an empty chamber, simply built for no reason. So why was it there, just taking up space where they could be containing more anomalies? They'd unknowingly unleashed their own demise into the facility. And it wasn't even the staff. When the creature ran out of Foundation personnel to kill, it even started killing and consuming the other anomalies kept at the site. It wasn't long until the entire facility was a ruin, with no survivors, being reclaimed by the woods around it. By 1995, people outside the base who were still aware of SCP-1763's existence decided to fence it in. They created a secure perimeter around the entire grounds of the old site, hoping to keep the monster contained so it couldn't reach the wider world and kill who knows how many people. This new containment area was dubbed Area 764. Information about SCP-1763 seemed impossible to proliferate. The official death count of the creature was around 30, despite everyone at the former Site-94 being considered lost. Anyone who entered the vicinity of the creature would lose knowledge of it, being affected by its anomalous perception effect. It was out there, not truly trapped, but rather caged within the illusion of security. Inside the Area 764 exclusion zone, it preyed on anything unlucky enough to still be inside, human or otherwise. But of course, that prey would run out eventually, wouldn't it? It would need to go further afield to get its fill, and that would inevitably lead it to the rest of us. However, if you read the file, you'll see that that simply didn't happen. Instead, the last update on the files regarding SCP-1763-EX didn't even have an object class. It seemed to have stopped existing, if it had ever existed in the first place, along with all of the people who'd once tried to contain it, and the measures for containment put in place. The whole thing had been nullified. There weren't even any remaining containment procedures, as though none were even needed. In the typical cold, neutral tone of Foundation documentation, it dismissed any need to perform further actions regarding the alleged anomaly. The closing words in the file were, "Several other iterations of this article have been located, referring to the entity as a physical creature. It is believed, therefore, that SCP-1763 was at one point both actively contained by the Foundation and not able to exert the range of anomalous phenomena available to it at present. Further interference suggests that SCP-1763's excision of itself from standard methods of perception is part of an ongoing trend, in which the entity is rendered less real over time, possibly as a survival technique, natural adaptation, or as a method of acquiring food. For obvious reasons, no elements of this hypothesis can be verified." After that, any remaining information in the file was corrupted. The trail went cold. Back in 2018, having finished reading the bizarre series of files on the drive, junior researcher Jeffries felt an odd chill creeping down his back. He'd read the file of many terrifying creatures before, but something about this one felt different, felt wrong. It just wasn't adding up. a creature that could alter its morphology, its physical body, as well as people's perceptions of it. Something that kept getting bigger, kept feeding, hunting, killing, all the while becoming harder to perceive as its reality and mind-warping camouflage evolved. He double-checked the records. There was no Site-94, never had been. There was never an Area 764 either, nor were there any records of the supposed deaths that the creature caused. But was that reality, or just what the creature itself wanted him to see, wanted him to believe? There was no way of telling. After all, the earlier files even said that the creature could edit and censor memories to keep itself concealed. If there was any truth to this, what would stop it from happening one more time? What would stop it from happening to him, right here, right now? Junior researcher Jeffries contacted one of his superiors, a senior researcher who also happened to be working late at the site that night. He needed a second opinion on this. The senior researcher read over the files with stone-faced neutrality, like he was reading the nutritional information on the back of a box of cereal, utterly unmoved by any of it. "This is what we in the industry call a self-cleaning oven, kid," the senior researcher said, getting up from the chair and yawning. Whatever this story is, it's seemingly sorted itself out. I wouldn't worry too much about it. False reports, prank files written by disgruntled staffers on their last week in the office. People did crazy stuff back in the 80s. And with that, the researcher left, leaving Jeffries alone in the darkened cubicle farm, illuminated only by the dim glow of his computer screen. He went home a couple hours after that, but as he was driving the long wooded back roads to his house, he couldn't help shake the feeling that something was wrong. He looked over his shoulder or at the rearview mirror, seeing a dark and lonely road bordered on both sides by trees, not even a car in sight. He couldn't see anything following. Then again, he wouldn't, would he? Jeffries tried to push the thought out of his mind and keep going. That night, he went to bed and tried his best to sleep off the bad thoughts. The next day, junior researcher Jeffries didn't go to work. Nobody noticed, of course. If you asked anybody, and even checked the official records, it'd be as though he had never even existed in the first place.
What's in a name? Ancient folklore and fairy tales sometimes tell of the importance of names, that they can hold the power to summon or banish. Whether you buy into the superstition or not, you'd be unwise to ignore the power a name can have, especially if you ever dare to venture into SCP-4000. Why? Use your own name too many times in this extra-dimensional forest, and you may find that what walks out isn't you at all. At least once a year, the Foundation leads an expedition into SCP-4000 to explore this Keter-class dimension. But if you go down to those woods today, then you'd better follow the rules. Remember, the Foundation has implemented these guidelines for your own safety, and it's in your best interests to follow them. First and foremost, when referencing anything inside SCP-4000, be it a person, place, or thing, you cannot, under any circumstances, use names or titles. Communication is key when exploring SCP-4000, and making use of specific descriptors will deter any adverse effects on your journey. For example, you may want to refer to the location of SCP-4000 as the woods where you need to speak carefully, an apt description for such a place. Of course, there is a reason the Foundation doesn't provide a handy flashcard of alternative descriptors for any personnel taking part in the annual mission into SCP-4000. Nothing found there can be referred to with any consistent name, so it's perhaps advisable to look over a thesaurus and expand your vocabulary before visiting SCP-4000, as you'll need to come up with a lot of different ways to refer to the people and creatures around you. But don't worry, the Foundation will be able to train you how to properly refer to SCP-4000 in both written and verbal communication. In a similar vein, the second rule states that no personnel member should respond to their own name while in SCP-4000. Naturally, you and your fellow expedition team will not be alone in the forest you find yourselves in. The denizens of SCP-4000 are perpetually mutating creatures, some appearing to be trustworthy while others are hostile. It is for personnel members' own safety that no consistent names or titles are used to refer to each other in conversation. This has been known to cause personnel returning from SCP-4000 to experience vivid hallucinations, and in some instances has led to the appearances of creatures found in SCP-4000 in our world. Thirdly, when interacting with the life forms residing in SCP-4000, personnel are advised to accept any gifts that they're offered, but are warned to, under no circumstances, consume anything that is given to them while inside the forest. Finally, and above all, do not divulge any name, nickname, codename, alias, or any other personal designation when interacting with any native entities, and disregard any designator that an inhabitant of SCP-4000 attempts to assign to you. Personnel must, however, remain courteous in the presence of any native creature of SCP-4000 and treat these entities with respect and formality. Access to SCP-4000 can only be achieved by performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, a ritual requiring a steady flame in an indoor fireplace fueled by only organic kindling. Personnel are required to combine the powdered bones of one male lion, one male red fox, and a baleen whale, and cast these into the fire with a personal possession holding strong sentimental value to the staff member performing 4000 Halloway. Next, personnel are to add 3 feathers of a bird, such as a raven or crow, and must respond with the correct counterphrases once the fire begins to emit a voice. If these conditions are met and the correct response is given, Foundation personnel will gain access to the entry point of SCP-4000. If any error is made during the course of performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, then under no circumstances should this ritual be repeated. Staff are urged to apologize for any incorrect actions, then refrain from engaging in this procedure in the future. Should Procedure 4000 Halloway be completed successfully, Foundation personnel will find themselves arriving in the access point to SCP-4000, emerging from the mouth of an old well in the center of the forest. Exploration teams sent into SCP-4000 are advised that this dimension does not adhere to the laws of physical space that personnel will be accustomed to. There is a single, confirmed safe route that must be used when traversing the forest of SCP-4000, a dirt path leading in a circuit both beginning and terminating at the entry point. Previous attempts to map the landscape of SCP-4000 all confirm that the only way to safely exit this dimension is to follow the entire length of the path in one direction until eventually returning to the well. You have been warned. Any attempt to travel back to the direction you came in will result in a loss of contact with the rest of the expedition team. As mentioned, SCP-4000 is home to a number of entities, often noted to be undergoing continuous and dramatic changes in form. These physiological mutations appear to occur whenever these creatures are unobserved, making distinguishing between them difficult. When questioned about the exact nature of these changes, the inhabitants of SCP-4000 claim to have no control over them and express distress and dissatisfaction when said changes occur. Guidelines have been put in place by the Foundation regarding the interactions between personnel and creatures found in the forest, and adhering to the rules regarding the use of consistent names and titles remains vitally important. The native creatures appear semi-humanoid and are reported to be highly temperamental. Should any staff member happen to offend one of these natives, they may be subjected to anything from verbal assault to acts of extreme physical violence from the SCP-4000 resident. If any Foundation personnel further question why there are so many rules when visiting SCP-4000, then they need to look no further than the discoveries and fate of Dr. Eugene Japers, who during his initial expedition to SCP-4000 in 2005 encountered a humanoid native entity whose head resembled a rabbit's. As the pair shared a polite conversation, the rabbit-like creature made an inquiry regarding Dr. Japers' name, asking, "How is your name?" Keeping to the rules, Dr. Japers did not divulge any name or other form of title to the creature at this time. However, Japers remained courteous and polite during the interaction. The rabbit responded with the following: "Are you simple? I'm merely asking how your name is. My name has smelt of raspberries lately, I think, or snapdragons perhaps. It's so hard to tell these days, but one makes an effort." In his reply, Dr. Japers made a reference to his own name as having tasted rather tart as of late, before concluding the conversation with the rabbit entity. Upon returning to the SCP-4000 forest 3 years later, Dr. Japers was met with the same creature and once again engaged in conversation with it. After briefly discussing their previous encounter, Dr. Japers was able to turn their exchange towards something the rabbit had mentioned before, about finding it difficult to describe his own name. When asked to clarify this point, the rabbit replied, "I can only assume it's because of how long we've been apart, my name and I, that is. It's a good name, a proud name, I'm fairly sure. By this point though, it's probably decayed from its former grandeur, if it even still exists." After this mention of its relationship with its own name, it should be noted that the rabbit referred to Dr. Japers by the title Fellow Scholar. The third and final encounter between Dr. Japers and this entity came in 2013, after the doctor was sent into SCP-4000 with instructions to conduct a more thorough interview with the subject. It was during their third conversation that the Rabbit Man revealed details of a long-forgotten war between human beings and the residents of SCP-4000. Apparently, these creatures, the Fae, do not originate from the forest in which they now reside. and according to the Rabbit Man's claims, were born in our world. Much as it grieves me to say, we were betrayed, the rabbit explained. We had fought side by side, in the war against that factory. We had done nothing but help them, and what did they do? They destroyed us. They took so many of our lives and all of our names. Some of us fled here when the war was just beginning, but not many. Not many. Still, though, I don't hate them. It has been assumed by some that the Foundation was directly involved in whatever may have wiped out the Fae, causing them to either retreat or be banished to the forest of SCP-4000. An additional assumption has been made that whatever weapons were used on these creatures is directly responsible for their constantly shifting state, rendering them without their own names or identities. Whatever the case may be, it was during their conversation that Dr. Japers, in reference to their second encounter, referred to himself as a fellow scholar to the rabbit in order to coax information from him. However, in doing so, the doctor had unwittingly accepted the title that the native entity had given him. By mistakenly responding to the name fellow scholar, the doctor had broken the rules of interacting with the creatures of SCP-4000, an easy mistake, but a costly one. The doctor would later leave SCP-4000, traversing the safe path back to the well, and Dr. Japers vanished shortly after his exit from SCP-4000. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The Foundation has made several attempts to investigate his untimely disappearance, but to this day, he remains missing, and the fur left on the inside of his expedition gear displayed no strange properties. The single goal, it would seem, of the creatures residing in SCP-4000 is the theft of names. However, this naturally extends far beyond the Dimension's definition of identity theft. Though an unfortunate blunder, Dr. Japers allowed the friendly nature and demeanor of the rabbit entity to trick him into accepting the name fellow scholar. By giving Dr. Japers a name, the rabbit was free to steal not only his name but his very identity. While it is unclear how this transference is achieved by the creatures, it is due to the risk of this that the Foundation employs such strict rules for any research team tasked with traveling to the forest of SCP-4000. Make no mistake, names have more power than we realize, and this is evident in few places more so than SCP-4000, a pocket dimension where ever-changing survivors of a forgotten massacre exist as identities alone. Remember, a name is a powerful thing, whichever side of the well you find yourself on. Your name binds you to who you are, but if your name becomes someone else's, then one else of yours becomes theirs too.
Jay and Michael were a pair of urban exploration YouTubers looking for their big break. You might remember their video exploring the dead mall on the outskirts of your town, or the supposedly haunted 1950s insane asylum out in the sticks. But you certainly won't find these videos anywhere online. After the incident at SCP-823, all of their content was scrubbed away from even the most comprehensive internet archives. Why, you ask? Because these unfortunate urban explorers decided that their big break would be exploring a certain abandoned theme park, and it would be one of the last decisions they ever made. Michael and Jay had heard rumors about the theme park. Its name was lost to time, as was the date of its opening and closing, and the reason it was even abandoned in the first place. Even some of the most hardcore urban explorers didn't dare to tread there. Something about it, a good friend had once told Jay, just didn't feel right. Sometimes if you dare to venture into the forest near the theme park at night, you can still hear music. The jolly, piping tunes of rides and carnival stands still beckoning, as if to say, we're still here, come and play. Of course, none of this frightened Jay and Michael. They could already smell the sponsorships from headlamp and compact camera companies. No amount of anxiety would stop them from making their doomed trip to the so-called Carnival of Horrors. It's a terrible shame. If they'd listened to the stories of this place about how unnatural and evil it could be, they might still be alive today. Like all the best urban explorers, they arrived at the woods near the abandoned theme park in the dead of night. They ignored the signs warning them about everything from structural instability to dangerous wild animals to asbestos. Nothing would keep them out. Nothing. They reached the abandoned theme park not long after, though it was a mere shell of its former self. During the several decades of abandonment, nature had reclaimed it. The Ferris wheel was covered in overgrown ivy, and the carnival stands were blanketed with mold. As the duo swept through the grounds with their flashlights and cameras, they saw a faded sign that bore the words, Thriller Chiller, the park's most popular roller coaster. They also took their time to marvel at the exceptionally creepy-looking Tunnel of Love, the broken-down House of Mirrors, and a huge grinning statue of the park's former mascot, Happy Hippo. This theme park was something out of a nightmare. which naturally made it potential video gold. But as the excited duo wandered further into the park, they couldn't help but notice the quiet, tinny carnival music. Music that seemed to be drawing them closer. Michael asked Jay if he could hear the strange, impossible music, and felt a chill creep in when he answered that he did. Could all of the stories be true? They were lost in thought, but their legs kept moving. They were getting closer to something now. They could feel a presence. And was that music getting louder? An instant later, though, another sound cut through the silence. Bang, bang. It echoed out through the still night air. Birds flew from their perches in the trees. Jay and Michael both fell to the ground dead, their heads taken off by the 50 caliber rounds of a highly trained mobile task force sniper on the payroll of the SCP Foundation. Their recording equipment, along with their bodies, were taken and destroyed. Any trace of them were scrubbed from the internet. It may seem a little harsh, but a bullet to the head is much kinder fate than what would have awaited these two if they'd kept walking. That's because the Carnival of Horrors is no dark fairy tale. The rumors are all true, and something really is waiting in the dark. That's why this abandoned theme park is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-823, a Euclid-class anomaly with a violent history. What's even more unnerving is that the researchers studying 823 have repeatedly implored the O5 Council to increase the park's classification to Ket tier and allocate more resources for containment, only to be denied. But after you've heard about the horrors that unfolded there and the danger it poses, you'll probably take the researchers' side. The park is divided into two zones, the yellow zone and the red zone. There are to be at least 6 members of Foundation personnel present in the yellow zone at all times to ensure that no civilians wander in. Our 2 urban explorers earn themselves a death sentence not just by wandering into the yellow zone, but passing dangerously close to the red zone. This is the true epicenter of the park's dangerous, anomalous activity. It's a place so hazardous that anyone entering, whether they're a civilian or a member of Foundation staff, is to be executed at a distance by sniper fire without hesitation. Once upon a time, though nobody knows exactly when, there was a theme park that seemed no different to any other. Eager children and thrill-seeking teens arrived by the busload, ready to stuff their faces with cotton candy and corn dogs, and then reverse the process on a vast array of roller coasters. But even then, during these good times, there was something dark lurking behind the cheerful facade. Little by little, everyone, visitors and employees alike, started falling victim to strange and horrific accidents around the park. Of course, when it comes to theme parks, accidents come with the territory, but none like this. Here are just a handful of the horrific and mysterious deaths that occurred while the park was open. So strap in, because just like a roller coaster, this isn't for the faint of heart. A pair of young lovebirds decided they wanted to enjoy the romance of the Tunnel of Love. The two sat in a swan-shaped boat as they were ferried through darkened passageways. Anyone would assume that they were having a great time, but at some point, terrible shrieks of pain and fear began to echo through the ride. Attendants, confused and terrified, stopped the ride and found that the screaming persisted. Just some stupid teens playing a prank, they figured, and started the ride again. But when the swan-shaped boat finally exited the Tunnel of Love, the park employees were greeted to a horrifying sight. The 2 teens dead, their bodies somehow fused together at multiple points. Another unlucky customer met a gruesome fate inside the House of Mirrors. They entered, but while inside, they were stalked by a mysterious, carnivorous humanoid entity known as Subject 79. The customer was pursued and eventually caught by Subject 79 and brutally dismembered. Some parts of the body were fused to the House of Mirrors interior, while others, like the right arm, were never found. The customer actually survived their ordeal, and whether that's a happy ending is up to you. But it wasn't just the customers at the park who were in danger. A 23-year-old park employee working a summer job collapsed while entertaining children dressed as the park's cheerful mascot, Happy Hippo. It wasn't uncommon for people to get overheated and collapse in the heavy suits on hot days. But one thing was different here. He was screaming, crying, and trying desperately to remove his mask. People rushed to help, but nobody could get the suit off, and he was declared dead soon after. When he was eventually cut out of the suit, coroners found that the employee had choked to death, His mouth, trachea, and lungs were filled with a fibrous substance later determined to be identical to the stuffing of his costume. An intense roller coaster known as the Thriller Chiller was a magnet for horrific accidents, which became more violent and intense over time. The first accident seemed like a typical theme park tragedy. A safety harness failed, dropping a rider 15 feet during an inverted loop. They landed on the track below, breaking their neck and skull, causing instant death. While this was a tragedy, it wasn't exactly anomalous. But the next major accident on the ride was an entirely different story. This time, 15 people met with disaster while riding the Thriller Chiller roller coaster. Starting from the front and moving back one car at a time, each group of riders was decapitated by blunt force trauma. A new pair of decapitations appeared to happen at every turn and loop on the ride. Forensic scientists still have no idea how this could have possibly occurred. Despite all of these disasters, the park was only finally abandoned after a day known as Bloody Sunday, when the anomalous powers of the location reached a 20-year peak. It's believed that 231 people were killed during the carnage of that day, and another 7 were horribly maimed. The SCP Foundation contained the Carnival of Horrors not long after, but the mysterious deaths didn't even end there. Foundation Mobile Task Force Row 71, also known as the Origami Toads, were sent in to assess containment procedures and discover the source of all the anomalous deaths. They were unsuccessful though, and instead they merely added to the list in exceptionally horrifying ways. One agent was found dead, surrounded by empty grenades and bullet casings. It appeared he'd removed the explosive propellant from all of his ballistics and consumed it, dying in the process. Another was found with his jaw broken, having apparently pulled out and inhaled his own teeth, and dying of the resulting internal damage. The commander got the worst fate of all, so horrifying in fact, that we can't tell you the full details. All you need to know is that something was shoved into his brain that really didn't belong there. The Foundation considered having the entire park destroyed with a massive airstrike, courtesy of the Mobile Task Force New 7, aka Hammerdown. However, the O5 Council denied this request, on the basis that the park was too close to populated land. They'd have no plausible cover story for the bombing, and they don't even really know if blowing up the park would prevent anomalous activity from occurring. The Carnival of Horrors is here to stay, folks. The Foundation just hopes to keep it from getting new visitors. So then back to why the researchers want this place upgraded to Ketir. After all, these classifications aren't about how dangerous an anomaly is. They're about how difficult and complicated they are to contain. But here's the problem. According to the researchers, the red zone, where the dangerous anomalous activity is at its peak, isn't bound to one fixed position. It's changed position at least 3 times already, and even worse, it appears to be growing. Not seemingly so Euclid class now, is it? After all, you might not even need to visit the Carnival of Horrors to be in grave danger. If it keeps growing, then someday soon, the Carnival of Horrors may be visiting you. We're all familiar with viral diseases, especially over the past 2 years. The deadliness and severity of a virus cannot be understated. Whether it's COVID-19, influenza, or any other of the countless infectious diseases that plague humanity. We're all familiar with the bubonic plague, the Black Death which wiped out an estimated 25 million people in the Middle Ages, a third of Europe's population at the time. But that was during an era in which medieval advances were limited to the sickening practice of bloodletting, which drained a patient of their blood until all bacteria left their system, or washing the body with vinegar. Of course, none of these methods had any effect on staving off the Black Death, and the epidemic went down in history as one of the darkest periods of civilization. But for all our technological and medical advances in the field of health and medicine, infectious diseases are still as much of a threat now as they were back then, if not a greater one. Think about it. In today's world, everything is heavily connected. Globalization means that we travel more, import more products than ever before, and with such a high population density, it's difficult to keep anything under control due to the sheer amount of people there are in the world. Complete eradication of a viral disease has proven extremely difficult in even the strictest, most regimented campaigns to do so. Vaccines, while effective, still require time to develop, roll out, and treat. Take for example the smallpox virus. For centuries, this deadly disease slayed entire populations. killing millions with a mortality rate of 40%. In the 20th century, the world's governments and medical organizations worked tirelessly to come up with a vaccinated cure for the disease, and their efforts eventually paid off. A successful vaccine was developed, and only the trickling of cases of smallpox were documented in Somalia in the 1970s. Today, all that remains of the disease are contained samples held in high-security laboratories across the world, explicitly used for research purposes. But smallpox's story is not the norm. Other diseases you may not realize are still lurking in the shadows are polio and malaria. Polio being a disease affecting the central nervous system, with weakened muscle function as a result, and malaria being a mosquito-transmitted sickness that results in severe fevers and vomiting. The common perception is that these illnesses aren't actually a threat anymore, and are nothing more than a relic of the past, but that isn't quite true. While they've been eliminated from some parts of the world, in polio's case, most first-world countries such as the United States and Europe still have some documented cases that crop up from time to time. But the future is hopeful, with only under 50 cases of polio documented worldwide in the year 2018, and malaria's worldwide eradication program seeing success year by year. Maybe the world will one day be fully wiped of these terrible illnesses. But why are we telling you this during a video about the SCP Foundation? Because the subject of today's video is also a deadly virus. But unlike the most ordinary variations we just discussed, this one is going to be a lot more difficult to eradicate fully. And by difficult, we mean next to impossible. As to be expected with an organization like the SCP Foundation, the threats they deal with are both similar to the ones the rest of the world's governments and large organizations do, and entirely, completely different. If you're a seasoned viewer of SCP Explained, chances are you are already familiar with more than a few anomalous viruses. They're unspeakably deadly, incredibly strange, and can put an infected victim through more pain and suffering than anything else in the world. It's a testament to the Foundation's thoroughness and capabilities that some of these diseases are even able to be concentrated in a manageable dose and contained inside a chamber at a secure facility. But for others, they're still out there, ready to strike at a moment's notice, and there's absolutely nothing the Foundation can do about it, except be as swift as possible in their retaliation. And there's no doubt that they're prepared. With the deadliness of an anomalous virus, which can spread at a more infectious rate and potentially alert the rest of the world to the supernatural happenings of the SCP Foundation and the objects they contain, an anomalous pandemic is one of the Foundation's greatest fears. Some anomalous diseases, as we mentioned before, are under the control of the Foundation. Take SCP-008, nicknamed the Zombie Plague, for example. SCP-008 is a deadly virus that, you guessed it, can essentially turn a patient into a zombie, reanimating their corpse after the sickness kills them. What makes SCP-008 unique is that it's entirely absent from the natural world, save for the places the Foundation has labeled G2 sites. These G2 sites are small pockets across the world in which the Foundation discovered SCP-008, which further research of such have determined that the disease may not have originated on Earth in the first place. Subjects infected by SCP-008 display symptoms within 3 hours of infection, which include flu-like symptoms, preceded by a coma, which is followed by death. But after death, the victim's body will continue to display lifeless signs of mortality, including a high durability to damage and a desire to ingest living humans on physical contact, just like a zombie. Research into SCP-008 is highly classified and left out from the original document because the Foundation has the right to fear that SCP-008 may be replicated in an unsuspecting laboratory one day. As such, containment efforts to prevent such research from bearing fruit are in place, backed by the Foundation's stranglehold over the ordinary scientific world. Thankfully, SCP-008 has mostly been destroyed, with samples contained solely at the G2 sites, which are now protected Foundation facilities located across the world. But the Foundation was lucky that SCP-008 was so easily contained. If the disease spread in larger numbers or originated from a natural source on Earth, we might be living in a world more like a zombie apocalypse movie than the one we know today. On the other side of the spectrum, you have SCP-3519, the Quiet Days virus. In one reality, SCP-3519 managed to kill off the entire world due to its severity and ease of infection. Unlike most anomalous diseases, SCP-3519 was a mimetic virus, meaning that its transmission wasn't just limited to the traditional means of physical contact, but the very idea of it permeating your mind would allow it to take root inside your body. SCP-3519 permeated the idea that the world would end on March 5, 2019, and that self-termination was a preferable option than living through the apocalypse and the terrible aftermath that would follow. SCP-3519 took society by storm, and the idea was transmitted through television broadcasts and news stories encouraging people to free themselves from the world, and even Foundation sites themselves. The Foundation was powerless, and the rapid rate of transmission proved too difficult for the organization to keep fully under control. The project to create a cure was greenlit, but one by one, as Foundation sites across the globe suffered massive die-offs and a loss of personnel, the research team dwindled down until there was only one person left, a junior researcher by the name of Rory Jones, who assumed the position of 05-6 in an emergency succession protocol that would promote the next highest member of the Foundation to the position in the event of an overseer dying. Jones was the only member of the Foundation left, and as far as he knew, camped up in a cabin in the woods with nothing but a few research materials and a computer terminal, the only man alive. The SCP-3519 timeline story proves just how quickly a deadly anomalous virus can get out of control. How it can make an organization as all-powerful and ever-prepared as the SCP Foundation just another statistic in a record of infected populations. But you don't need to tell the Foundation that. They're already well aware, and they've had decades to prepare, study, and analyze the effect an anomalous virus can have on the world. And that brings us to the mysterious case of the main anomaly we'll be looking at today, SCP-217, the Clockwork virus. Dr. Charles Gears, a researcher of note that you may have heard of before, was one of the Foundation's best and brightest. His cold, distant demeanor and propensity for researching the anomalous commonly associated with a divergent religion, the Church of the Broken God, a group of zealots focused on reassembling the broken metal pieces of their mechanical, technological god, made onlookers associate the Gears name with sleek, careless alloys and methodical, cold clockwork. When the Foundation began observing symptoms of what would later be labeled SCP-217 in a major population center, whose name would be scrubbed from all official documents, they knew Dr. Gears was the right man to head the research efforts. For years, the Foundation had observed strange medical records and reports from the city. Reports of dementia in subjects younger than the common age brackets and at uncommonly high rates. High reports of lethargy, depression, emotional dulling, and a feeling of something moving underneath the skin or a ticking noise in the ear were all signs that the Foundation was dealing with SCP-217. Dr. Gears was already familiar with the disease, having worked alongside efforts to study it in the past. This was not the first major population area affected by SCP-217, and there surely were more areas up next. Upon arriving and reading the initial reports, Dr. Gears requested to view a subject that the Foundation believed was suffering from SCP-217. When the young woman entered, Gears immediately recognized the signs, the stiff movements, the robotic, monotone voice, and the way that nothing he seemed to say fazed her. They were all clear-cut signs of SCP-217's infection. The girl was barely high school age, but she looked like she had all of her youth and life zapped out of her completely. It was a horrible sight to see. An X-ray was performed, and Gears saw for himself a definitive sign that SCP-217 had taken over her body. The X-ray imagery showed the inside of the girl's body, which had been converted from an ordinary mass of organs and tissues into a clockwork machine, composed of cogs, gears, screws, and wires. And as Gears knew, this would only get worse as time went on, with signs of her infection appearing outside the body as well as inside. Right now, there wasn't a shred of human tissue left inside her, and there was nothing the doctor could do about it. Gears thought about the girl's family, who had been anesthetized prior to the Foundation seizing their daughter for research purposes. And though the emotionless man would never let his facade down, his heart ached for her. But it wasn't only her. It was dozens of people inside the city the Foundation had documented as displaying symptoms of SCP-217. On a scale this high, there was little the Foundation could do except sit back, watch, and only act when the symptoms became too visible to hide. That was the tragedy of SCP-217, the Clockwork virus. It wasn't deadly, but it was a slow, more metaphorical death, from a person made of flesh and blood to a clockwork automaton that felt more like a shell than a living thing. The Foundation was more than familiar with SCP-217 though, and multiple samples are held inside a reverse-pressure airlocked containment chamber at a high-security site for research purposes, in hopes that one day, a cure could be developed. Personnel wanting to access SCP-217 samples have to don fully insulated hazmat suits, with chemical sterilization and endure a post-interaction quarantine period, with physical testing. All this being mandatory after they have finished their experiments with the virus. The severity of an SCP-217 infection cannot be understated, and any items touched by infected personnel have to undergo a strict sterilization process. The Foundation is perfectly justified in this overly cautious behavior too, because SCP-217 has an infection rate of 100%, meaning that it will transmit through physical contact all of the time without failure. But it doesn't just infect humans. The Clockwork virus has been observed to infect all multicellular organisms. From the smallest insect to an elephant, SCP-217 consumes and hollows out all it can. Clockwork beings rot from a clockwork virus, marching to the ticking of their innards in a hollow, empty world. If that sounds terrifying and like a nightmare, then congratulations. Chances are you're unaffected by SCP-217. If it sounds appealing, well, you might just be a mechanite ready to serve the Church of the Broken God, but we'll get to that connection later. SCP-217 is especially difficult to deal with due to its hardiness. It can survive for years outside a host body, and when it does find a suitable host, and trust us, there's no shortage in supply of them in the world, it can sometimes take years for symptoms of SCP-217 to manifest. It's a slow virus, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The Foundation might not realize a large population area has been infected before it's too late, and that's exactly what happened before, with entire towns being infected by SCP-217. But what are those symptoms? Well, you might have already been able to guess so far that SCP-217 has to do with turning someone into a mechanical monstrosity, but there's a bit more to it than that. SCP-217 alters biochemistry in such a way that it causes organic matter to rearrange itself into an organic metal. Chemical scans of this metal reveal that there's still living cellular tissue and DNA present inside it, but it takes the appearance and feels indistinguishable from actual materials. This process occurs slowly over time, and advanced stages have shown that a subject's interior will resemble a machine, with a complicated mixture of gears and clockwork. This is subtle, barely noticed by the patient at first, with only vague feelings of confusion, insomnia, and joint stiffness. But as larger and larger parts of the body are converted, the subject experiences extreme pain. As Dr. Gears wrote in his research notes on SCP-217, hearts are replaced by gears and small tubes, joints by gear networks, eyes by structures not unlike primitive hand-crank film cameras, etc. SCP-217 in non-mammals shows first on the outside of the body. In mammals such as humans, SCP-217 converts the internals before being visible on the outside of the body. The reason for this is unknown, but it might have something to do with that broken god connection we mentioned earlier. One of the Church's core beliefs focuses on ascending humanity to reflect Mechane, the broken god. While the origins of SCP-217 are unknown, if the virus is related to the Mechanites, this subtle, slow infection may be a part of their grand design. A plan to covertly infiltrate society and convert the masses into effigies of their god. But of course, this is all speculation. As we mentioned, those infected by SCP-217 can be entirely unaware of their conversion until it's too late. But aside from physicality, the mental state is also affected. From the middle to advanced stages of SCP-217 infection, victims' behaviors reflect their cold, mechanical insides. They respond in a repetitive, disassociated fashion. Their actions are dull, mechanical, and telegraphed. They're easily distracted and confused, and appear irritable when faced with new problems. In the early stages, SCP-217 manifests as increased lethargy, a lack of emotional response, and a feeling of fluttering or moving underneath the skin. Always present are ticking noises, like those of a clock. that mainly manifest when SCP-217 infects the shoulders, neck, and head. But attempts to hear this noise using recording equipment have invariably failed, as the device will not pick up any sound if pressed against an affected area. As SCP-217's infection advances, the subject will experience excruciating pain, sharp, tearing sensations in the areas that are being converted into organic metal, comparable in feeling to a knife wound or a deep muscle tear. This feeling can persist for hours or days, depending on which area of the body is being affected and the subject themselves. After tearing the existing organs, the new parts will integrate into the tissue and settle into the body, producing pain. An analysis of this newly formed organic metal appears to be alloys of brass, steel, and iron varieties, but substances such as leather, rubber, glass, and wood have been observed. And observed is the key word, because as soon as these materials are examined deeper, it's revealed that they're still organic in composition, and even carry the subject's DNA. Organs and tissues affected will, however, become stronger. Instead of being squishy meat bags filled with tissue, blood, and other parts, they take on the physical properties, namely durability, of the material they resemble. If one of these areas are damaged, they'll repair over time just like regular organs, but at a much slower rate. But one interesting note is that a damaged piece of organic metal can be repaired, so to speak, by replacing damaged areas with new parts of the same type. This has had no consequences, and the body will continue to act as normal. That's one benefit of being infected by SCP-217. You can essentially repair yourself with whatever you have access to. But the conversion of a victim doesn't stop. It continues to occur until their entire body is organic metal, inside and out. Dr. Gears's research on a fully converted brain was apparently so groundbreaking that it had to be erased from the standard security class documentation. We can only speculate on what it contained. Possibly that connection to the broken god that we're so desperate to make? We don't know. But whatever it was, it hinted at something far larger than what a cursory look at SCP-217 seems to suggest. SCP-217 is truly one of the most dangerous anomalous viruses the Foundation has to deal with, having already infected hundreds of people in various population centers around the world, before containment methods can be properly established. So if you happen to start hearing the sounds of a tick here and a talk there, accompanied by a strange fluttering feeling under your skin, we're sorry to say, there's not much we can do for you now. Actually, nothing. There's nothing we can do. Your boss's office, his name etched on the frosted glass window in the door, sitting at the end of a long hallway. He called you in, and you don't know if you'll be leaving with your job. A grimy public bathroom filled with graffiti, spiders, cracked toilet seats, and a sinister shadow in the very last stall. A surgical theater where masked doctors wait with gleaming scalpels, forceps, and bone saws, preparing for an operation that you don't know if you'll wake up from. All of these have one thing in common. They're rooms that inspire dread. But after this video, you'll look back on all of them like you would your cozy childhood bedroom. A wise man once said, life has many doors. What he didn't say is that sometimes opening the wrong door can be a way of bringing that life to an untimely end, or worse. Especially when you're dealing with the kind of horrifying anomalies secured and contained by the SCP Foundation. You may think it's what's lurking inside the room that might be your biggest threat, but that's a potentially lethal assumption. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the room itself. And that's what we're here to talk about today. 7 of the most terrifying rooms on the Foundation's database, none of which have ever been featured on this channel before. So reach out, grab the handle, and open the door. Welcome to the SCP Foundation's most terrifying rooms. All you can do is hope that, by the end, you'll actually be able to leave. We'll begin with an old classic from Series 1, SCP-002, a maleficent meatball known as the living room. There's a decent chance you're sitting in your living room right now while you watch this video, so you may be thinking, what's so wrong about that? But this really is a living room, and it's always on the lookout for some tasteful new furniture. From the outside, SCP-002 appears to be a huge, tumorous blob made out of living flesh. Sure, that may seem off-putting, But don't be so superficial. The inside of 002 is a different story. It may appear like your standard low-rent apartment from within, but this place has a lot of personality. There's a single window, despite there being no opening for a window from the outside. In addition to all the standard furniture, chairs, tables, a TV stand, it's actually developed a number of other wonderful amenities since being contained by the Foundation, including 2 lamps, a throw rug, a television, a radio, a beanbag chair, 3 books in an unknown language, 4 children's toys, and a small potted plant. The first thing you might notice about the room is the funny smell. Then you might take a closer look at all that lovely furniture. That's when you'll realize that every single piece of furniture in there is made out of human tissue. Wood is polished and varnished bone. Fabrics are woven from human hair. Leather is made from tanned human skin. This is what happens to anyone who enters SCP-002. And sadly, if you've gotten close enough to see this, it's already too late. We hope you enjoy the rest of your existence as a brand new armchair. But maybe you don't want to get turned into furniture inside a living room within a giant tumor. Maybe you've got more specific needs. You like puzzles, exercises, and most of all, solitude. You like to test your mental and physical fortitude without worrying about the distractions caused by having to deal with other human beings. If that sounds like you, then let's get your feet wet and tell you about a wonderful piece of prime real estate you can find under the sea, SCP-057. This underwater chamber is almost impossible to get to without a James Cameron-style mini-submarine, but believe us, it's worth the effort. If you manage to access SCP-057 and enter its submerged chamber, then you're going to be treated to the best last challenge of your life. The door will close behind you, permanently, ensuring that wonderful privacy you so covet. Then the walls. These impenetrable monoliths of slate-covered stone will begin to move. Like a kind of high-stakes game show, you'll need to keep moving, avoiding the ever-shifting walls as the environment around you becomes more and more disorienting. There is no escape, only survival, and survival is only temporary. When your body fails you, or your mind snaps under the weight of sustained mortal terror, that's when those walls will close in. The monoliths of SCP-057 will get closer and closer and closer, until your body is crushed between them, killing you with a torturously slow squeeze where nothing and nobody will ever hear your final choked screams. But it's all worth it for that glorious ocean view. Oh, look at all those adorable little fishies. But hey, maybe sea punk isn't your favorite aesthetic. Maybe you're the more industrial type. You couldn't feel more at home than among a complex network of anomalous pipes. We'll admit that's eerily specific, but it isn't half as eerie as SCP-015. If you ever find yourself opening the door to the main room of a certain undisclosed warehouse, you'll feel like you've walked into an early 2000s screensaver with a decidedly gritty edge. An impossibly huge and intricate mass of pipes, vents, boilers, and other various plumbing apparatus that just keeps growing, seemingly becoming more strange and anomalous as it does so. These pipes have been made out of bone, wood, steel, pressed ash, human flesh, glass, and granite. There aren't any pipes made out of traditional pipe-making materials like lead, copper, ceramics, or PVC. And if you think what the pipes are made of is weird, the materials that travel through them are even freakier. These include oil, mercury, rats, a species of insect not yet identified, ground glass, seawater, entrails, and molten iron. And this is important to remember, because if you appear hostile to SCP-015 or enter the room carrying tools, the pipes will begin to burst and spray you with their contents in self-defense, resulting in one of the few times in human history where you'd be incredibly lucky to only be sprayed with rats or human entrails. Much like SCP-173, the sculpture, it's important to keep this room under strict observation. It's when the pipes are left unoccupied that they start expanding and trying to grow downwards in the hopes of mixing with the sewer system below. If ever that happens, then the pipes may end up coming to a room near you. And considering that people have also reported screaming coming from inside the pipes, what comes out of them may not even be as frightening as what could be going in. But maybe you don't want a warehouse. Perhaps you just want to rent a small, cozy room in a one-story building over in Weehawken, New Jersey. Problem is, if you try to do this, you might end up lodging in SCP-5256, a room that defies reality in a number of freaky ways thanks to its prior occupant, a highly unstable reality warper. The reality filters get stronger the further you go into the room, with the terminus being the room's far corner, which presents as an empty void that's impossible to even see. A damaged bloody hammer is lodged into the far wall. Metal fragments covered in human blood float near the entrance, half-eaten bugs all over the floor. There's a crucifix on the wall along with medical-grade anesthetics with trace amounts of neural tissue inside. All evidence points to the reality warper having been the victim of atrocious and inhumane acts, perhaps as a way to cure it of its anomalous affliction. And to add to the creep factor, many believe its body is still in there, lurking in the unseeable corner. How do we know? Because despite the corner of the room being unseeable, people have still performed simple tactile tests by sticking their hand into the space. One D-Class reported it feeling like leathery flesh with occasional scraps of fabric, and sharp needle-like objects occasionally sticking out of its skin. But for rent this cheap, who can really complain about a body or two? But that's enough about things that are just creepy. Let's get to dangerous instead. A room that won't just freak you out with some eerie anomalous sights. If you get unlucky, it'll give you a horrifying death. After all, who doesn't like a little excitement? Step into SCP-4595, a small room in a woodshed behind an abandoned house near Jasper, Indiana. You'll be taken in by its rustic charm at first. It's a quiet, peaceful setting where you're alone with your thoughts. When the room was first found, it contained a small, blood-stained shovel and a skeleton of an adolescent male. But don't let that put you off. Don't let the charcoal marking of the word witch written on the exterior door bother you either. It all just adds to the character of the room. Oh, there is one thing we should probably mention. There is an entity known as SCP-4595-A that lives a meter beneath the room. She's a witch-like creature, rotted and covered in wounds on her torso and face. Her mere presence will instill a sense of paranoia and dread into you, getting worse and worse the longer you're in there. But stay quiet about it. If at any point you disturb SCP-4595, all the empty spaces in your chest cavity as well as your lungs, airways, stomach, and intestine will suddenly fill with live desert locusts, causing you to experience a horrible death. So be a considerate upstairs neighbor, or else. So remember when we said earlier that it's not always what's inside the room that can cause you harm? Sometimes it's the thing right on the other side of the door. Look at the nearest closed door. Really focus on it. Tell us, how can you be so sure there's not something on the other side? Can you hear its heavy, wheezing breaths? It's not a home invader. It's something even worse. SCP-303. And it can make any room, anywhere, an absolute nightmare for you. Keep an eye on that door while we explain. SCP-303 is a tall, emaciated creature with dark skin and no face. Just a giant mouth twisted into a fixed grimace of pain with unnaturally long teeth. Nobody has ever seen its full body, but everyone afflicted with its anomalous effects somehow has an innate knowledge of exactly what they're dealing with. The amount of time that 303 spends behind the door seems to be random, but whenever it appears, people will be afflicted with such a level of raw, paralytic terror that they physically cannot bear to open the door while it's still there. This is one thing if it's hiding inside a broom closet, but if you're trapped in a room with only one exit, and 303 manifests behind it, you are in real trouble. As the number of people who have died of dehydration and starvation in totally normal rooms while boxed in by 303 have found out, when you're dealing with this monster, any room can be a nightmare. But while 303 is no doubt scary, it's not quite as mind-melting as SCP-970, the final anomalous room on this list. Much like 303, it involves doors, and rather than being fixed to a single location, it can appear in theoretically any room. Known as the recursive room, stepping through this door will lead to a copy of the room you were just inside. A little trippy, but not exactly pure nightmare fuel. But much like how a photocopier will slowly create distortions if the same image is copied repeatedly, the more rooms in the recursive room sequence that one cycles through, the more distorted each one gets. Eventually, the rooms will begin to display visuals straight out of your worst nightmares. Foundation researchers who sent a drone through a 6-hour sequence of recursive rooms ended up being discharged to undergo psychiatric treatment after seeing their own mutilated corpses in the rooms. A cruel trick? Or a deadly phenomenon of things to come in a darker possible future? Either way, these unfortunate researchers couldn't get their experience in the recursive room out of their heads. But we're sure you'll have a more pleasant time. There you have it, folks. Some of the most terrifying rooms that the SCP Foundation is aware of. Let us know which one was your favorite down in the comments. And of course, be careful. If these are the ones the Foundation has in containment, imagine the ones that are still out there, waiting to be discovered. For all you know, it could only be one door away. In 1961, the SCP Foundation discovered a town that was completely devoid of all life. Not long before their arrival, Darrington, North Carolina had been a community with high aspirations, a deeply religious township of devout Christians, many of whom were seeking greater prosperity from their lives. But now their home was a ghost town, with no sign of any prior Darrington resident to be found. Where in the hell had they all gone? It hardly seemed like the population of an entire town would all simultaneously decide to up sticks and leave to pastures new. But then again, maybe the citizens of Darrington hadn't left at all. Perhaps they weren't even really still human and had taken up residence somewhere much darker, like underground. This is the story of one of the earliest known instances of a phenomenon now known under the designation of SCP-3089, or to use its alternative name, that old-time religion. When the SCP Foundation arrived in a desolate Darrington to find the townsfolk had all vanished, they immediately began an investigation into the exact hows and whys, the answers to what exactly had happened here. After all, while not a huge place, Darrington was home to nearly 1,000 residents, and that many people don't just disappear, if they even had disappeared and weren't just dormant. But what the Foundation uncovered was a gruesome discovery that led them to not only demolishing the entire North Carolinian town, but purchasing all the land around it to keep the area under permanent observation. Prior to the demolition, however, the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing had been one of the oldest buildings in Darrington, much like most town churches. And it was while searching the offices of this church that the Foundation cleanup crews discovered their first piece of evidence, the initial clue about what had happened to this deserted town. They recovered a series of cassette tapes, each with a recording of sermons that had been given within the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing. These were all delivered by one Pastor Bartholomew Jenner, the first having been recorded on August 17th of 1959, 2 years earlier. "My friends, I want to talk to you about what the Bible offers tonight," Pastor Jenner began in the first of these recordings. "I want to talk to you about what you are owed. I want to talk to you to those of you who are struggling right now, to those of you who have hardship and pain. Maybe you've heard that the Bible only nourishes the spirit, that God only provides for our immortal souls. Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that this is simply not true." Pastor Bartholomew Jenner seemed to be focused on the discussion of very real, relatable problems. After all, what person hasn't felt unsatisfied with their life at one point or another? And this was apparently no different for the people of Darrington. Many of you can think of places in your lives where you have not yet risen, where you are not yet victorious. Marriage, finances, health. But do not fret, my friends, God wants you to rise. He has cleared a path for you. It is one littered with his earthly treasures. To claim them, you only need to shed your old selves and be reborn. The pastor was merely using the shared faith of the township to help reaffirm that their struggles were not the be-all end-all of their lives. Or at least, that's how it first appeared. But the religious practices taking place in this first recording would soon take a bizarre turn, making it clear there was something far more sinister, even cult-like, going on in the ministry of sevenfold blessing. Now, if you would, some of the ladies from the mayor's office were kind enough to collect these cicada shells. Pass along, each of you take one. Yes, the children too. Be careful, very careful. They are fragile. Each of you take one and hold it in your left hand. Yes, the left hand, not the right. Your left. The shells of dead cicadas hardly seemed like common fare for a sermon like this. Although as the recording continued, it was easy to understand that Pastor Jenner intended these discarded insect carapaces to be something of a metaphor, even if they were pretty gross, especially to some of the younger members of his congregation. He explained to the Darrington residents that these cicada shells were meant to be symbolic of whatever hardship the citizens were currently struggling with in their lives, whether it was work, a marriage, or an ill family member. Then came the next part of this unorthodox practice. The pastor instructed everyone in the congregation to picture themselves holding their biggest problem in their left hand. Now I want you to squeeze your left hand. Squeeze it into a fist. Feel that problem cracking like old dried out paper. Feel it crumble to dust. Jenner told them, and the residents of Darrington did so, crushing the cicada shells until there was nothing left. Everyone open your eyes. Don't you feel better? Stronger. This is what is offered. Our hardships are like the shell. We shall cast them aside even as they crumble. God has cleared a path. Needless to say, the Foundation agents that recovered the tapes of Pastor Jenner's odd sermons weren't exactly sure what to make of them. And as unusual as they were, the recordings did little to indicate where the townspeople of Darrington, North Carolina had disappeared to. But as they listened further, what they found was even more unsettling than an entire congregation of people crushing cicada shells. In the second recording, dated December 19th of 1959, Pastor Jenner was once again presiding over his congregation. He had just finished quoting a passage from Matthew chapter 25, verse 30, which related to a biblical tale known as the Parable of the Talents. In this story, a master puts his servants in charge of a differently sized portion of his wealth while he is away, then judges them based on whether or not his servants make a profit using his money. The third servant, who had received the least talents, meaning an amount of money, was punished for burying his share in the ground. Cast out into the outer darkness, to face weeping and gnashing of teeth. It was after making mention of this unprofitable servant that Pastor Jenner went on to address even more of the bizarre, almost ritualistic practices he had been introducing to his sermons. Now, some of you have expressed concerns over the new sacraments. A few have even called them sacrilege. And yet, have we not prospered? Have these same naysayers, these same doubting Thomases, not profited from our good works? The pastor declared, I have shown you how to heal the sick with the Lord's Prayer and the blood of an unbaptized child. I have shown you how to see your future in the stemming entrails of a quivering crow. I have shown you the path to glory. But I cannot make you follow this path. I can only show it to you. It is you and you alone who must follow it, who must rise and shed your old self. Shed your old self. The words immediately called to mind the image of the cicadas, insects that discard their outer carapaces and emerge anew, bugs that also burrow into the ground and wait, lying dormant under the earth for years at a time, all before they emerge, rising up again, so they can spread. It was becoming clear that Pastor Jenner was certainly deviating further and further from the church's normal religious practices. His bold and blatant descriptions of what sounded like ritualistic sacrifices were shocking enough to hear, speaking of using blood and entrails to bring the town the prosperity it sought. But if that wasn't bad enough, the worst was still yet to come, contained within the third and final recording. Unlike the previous cassettes, most of the sermon from June 7, 1960 was almost completely unintelligible, and without any visual evidence to go along with it, it was hard for the Foundation to make out exactly what was going on. It began with another quote from Matthew, this time chapter 28, verse 6, which made mention of the resurrection of Jesus, that he had risen, and that people should come and see where the Lord lay. Not a metaphor, my friends, Pastor Jenner explained before urging his congregation to join in some kind of formation. Step forward, mothers behind their daughters, fathers behind their sons. turn to face the The recording became unintelligible again after that point, with only a few more words being audible. The pastor seemed to have gathered the townsfolk of Darrington, presumably for some new form of ritual. He encouraged the town's children to close their eyes and pray, before reminding the congregation that God sacrificed the life of his only son, Jesus. Frighteningly, it appeared that Pastor Jenner was implying the adults of Darrington should do the same. One of the next fragments of his sermon that could be deciphered declared, "Lamb is slaughtered to feed the lion, the son is slaughtered to feed." Between more and more noise interfering with the recording, Pastor Jenner could be heard saying, "The pact is complete. This world shall be our paradise," before he encouraged his congregation, or those who were left, to dig deep and wait. Then came perhaps the most horrifying part of the tape. The remainder of the recording lasted 30 minutes, comprised of pure static. Or the Foundation agents listening to it assumed at first that it was just interference, but further audio analysis seemed to suggest that the long, continuous mass of hissing wasn't static at all. It was the chittering sound of insects, like the noise made by cicadas. For a time, the incident at Darrington left the Foundation baffled. There seemed to be no clear answer as to what had happened. Not one of the town's residents were anywhere to be found, and on top of that, there were no bodies, no remains of any kind to speak of. If they were dead, there would at least be some kind of trace. And then there were all the questions raised by Pastor Bartholomew Jenner's strange sermons. Why did he seem so focused on enacting rituals? Did any of his methods really benefit the town? And why did he place so much emphasis on cicadas, of all things? Answers were few and far between. Although almost 6 decades after the Foundation discovered the desolate town of Darrington, a new development would come to light. To be more accurate, it was 56 years later. On the 11th of January 2017, a Foundation agent named Daniel Mitchell was patrolling the area that had formerly been Darrington, North Carolina, before the Foundation had demolished all traces of the town. By this point, the SCP Foundation had long thought that they had figured out exactly what SCP-3089 was. They had even encountered it emerging in a number of different forms in both 2007 and 2015. However, it was what Daniel Mitchell happened across during the routine monthly patrol that revealed the horrifying truth. At the outskirts of the area where the town had once been, a series of sinkholes had opened up at some point between the previous monthly check and this one in early 2017. And if you think that these sinkholes caused a disturbance in the earth and uncovered all the bodies of the former residents of Darrington, you'd be wrong. It was far, far stranger. The Foundation conducted a full-scale examination of the sinkholes around the demolished North Carolinian town. And these weren't just a few patches of loose ground that had sunk through. The geological survey the Foundation carried out quickly revealed that these sinkholes led to an extensive network of tunnels underground. They extended several hundred kilometers outwards, practically covering the entire underside of where Darrington had been. The tunnels seemed far too big than any other created by any natural means, but the entire network also appeared too rudimentary, too imperfect to have been carved using any modern excavation technology, like a large drill. Plus, if any equipment like that had been on site, the Foundation would have noticed, as they kept the area monitored. It was almost like something had been burrowing through the ground, only to eventually crawl back up to the surface, resulting in the sinkholes. What's more, the Foundation's geological tests suggested that the network of tunnels was almost 4 decades old. That would have placed the date of their creation about 10 years after the disappearance of everyone in Darrington. Naturally, the Foundation immediately launched a mission to explore more of the tunnels. Before even completing a full sweep of the underground space in its entirety, they had made another discovery. Contained within the tunnels was over a whole ton of organic material that had been mostly preserved without decomposing too much. The SCP Foundation began gathering samples for testing, finding most of this material to be severely desiccated dermis tissue. That is the dense layer of skin beneath the epidermis, and it had all been entirely dried out. But that wasn't all the testing uncovered. According to genetic analysis, the tissue had 2 distinct types of DNA present. The first being easily identified as human genetic material, which made sense. Despite the material lacking in moisture, the dermis tissue didn't match the skin of any other mammal. But then there was the other DNA present, Combined with the expected human DNA was the presence of something else that the Foundation researchers had quite some difficulty finding a match for. Eventually, they determined that this genetic material entangled with the human DNA belonged to the Cicadata montana, better known as the New Forest cicada. Cicadas, again. Cicada DNA mixed with human DNA, discovered in a large network of underground tunnels, all beneath the same town where a pastor had his congregation crush cicada shells in their left hands during one of his sermons. 10 years before the sinkhole incident, the Foundation was alerted to a particular YouTube channel by the name of Kai Sanchez Positively Rich. On the surface, Kai was one of the many online grifters preaching about how easy it was to quickly achieve an obscene amount of wealth by simply believing in yourself. Usually, if not always, these types of people were trying to scam their audience of loyal subscribers into investing in some kind of illicit money-making scheme or any number of other cons, promising their followers easy money that never came. But Kai Sanchez's channel was slightly different, so much so that the Foundation had to contain his entire audience, deeming them to have been affected by SCP-3089. The video that caught the Foundation's attention was an hour-long upload from Kai, entitled 7 Secrets to Ascend the Ladder of Prosperity. There was that word again, prosperity. The same thing Pastor Jenner had promised his entire congregation in Darrington, and the similarities didn't end there. In his video, much like the pastor during his sermons, Kai Sanchez encouraged his audience to visualize their success in order to achieve it. He implied that the human consciousness could impact reality. For example, if his viewers just imagined themselves having a bigger bank account or looking more attractive, then these things would manifest themselves into the real world. One of Kai's secrets to ascend the ladder of prosperity was as follows.
Visualize your ascendance. Reimagine yourself as someone who can reach the top of that ladder. Shed your old identity, tear it off, throw it aside like dead skin. You won't need it, not where you're going.
The resemblance to Pastor Jenner's sermons was uncanny. Kai's video even encouraged that his audience leave scraps out to lure stray cats into their homes, and then, once they had one, to take a knife and, well, you remember what happened in Darrington. But Kai Sanchez made sure to specify,
remember to hold the knife with your left hand.
Another online community was tagged by the Foundation for similar teachings. This group of insular men were trying to apply the same methodology primarily to attract women. However, they also reasoned it could be used to improve their own financial status and physical stature, all done through visualizing and believing that doing so would make these things improve, that having faith would grant them prosperity. This disturbed community even tried to use bug rattlers to emit frequencies to aid in attracting women. Contained within these rattlers were the preserved remains of cicadas. Male cicadas have tymbals, structures on their outer shell that emit a loud hissing, chittering noise that they often use to find a mate after spending so much time dormant underground before burrowing up to the surface. And if you've been paying attention, you might be able to guess exactly where this is going. SCP-3089 is a phenomenon that occurs within communities of people who are seeking some form of prosperity. Whether that community be a town, a group of like-minded people online, or any other group of collected individuals. The particular type of prosperity these people are all seeking can be anything from spiritual enlightenment to financial success. The SCP Foundation does not yet quite understand exactly how SCP-3089 starts, only that the communities affected by it will attempt to achieve their chosen material success through the application of rituals, like visualizing what they hope to overcome and achieve, and practicing sacrifices. In short, these people have to believe these acts will grant them what they want. They need to be willing to go far enough to do unspeakable things. They need to have faith. Although what they don't realize is, some things can feed on that faith. They can harvest it. Before these communities realize the terrible things that they have done, or who exactly has tricked them into performing these rituals, they'll begin to undergo a horrific transformation process, known as SCP-3089-B. It begins in the chrysalis stage. Members of a community that have been affected by SCP-3089 will experience a declined state of metabolism, now classified as an instance of SCP-3089-A. Their brain activity, heart rate, and body temperature will all begin to lower. Over a period of between 3 and 6 hours, These people will then suffer a change to their epidermis, the outer layer of skin. It starts to harden until it has formed a dense, brittle substance, like a shell. Next comes the second stage of SCP-3089-B, metamorphosis. Internally, SCP-3089-A individuals will develop a number of tetromas, a type of germ cell tumor that can contain several different types of tissue, such as hair, muscle, and bone. During the next 2 or 3 weeks, these tumors will expand and dissolve the person's soft tissue. Then there's the final stage, emergence. An instance of SCP-3089-A will exit its dormant state that began in the initial stage. Once they have awoken, then something exits the outer epidermal shell. It will not communicate. Some will retain remnants of internal organs, such as eyes or lungs. However, these are vestigial, no longer serving any purpose. The brain functions deviate from any normal human patterns. Having completed the process, this thing will attempt to burrow down into the soil via any means at its disposal. An outer shell, digging into the soil. The tunnels underneath Darrington, the genetic material uncovered below. Dermis tissue with 2 types of DNA, a mix of human and cicada. There is something out there. It is preying on people's faith, their longing for prosperity. Then when these communities are presented with someone who can take advantage of that faith, like Pastor Jenner or Kai Sanchez, they find themselves encouraged to push their faith to its furthest limit. And then they are rewarded by becoming something else, something nightmarish. The question is, when they wake up and crawl back out from their tunnels, leaving a sinkhole in their wake, where do these cicada creatures go? 40 years ago, a U.S. Navy exploratory vessel landed on a chain of islands in the South Atlantic, just 2,000 miles off the coast of Argentina. In other words, the middle of nowhere. Yet on this far-off set of rocks afloat in the middle of the ocean, they discovered a vast array of strange wildlife and plant species that resemble little of what they left behind on the mainland. Could this be a treasure trove of undiscovered species, they wondered. Hoping to capitalize on the discovery, a reconnaissance team of researchers was sent out to explore some of the islands on foot, and what they found did not disappoint. From endangered species of birds to plant life and vegetation that looked like it belonged on Mars, they found a dizzying array of new and exciting examples of evolutionary oddities that would fill a library. But unfortunately, their jubilation was cut short. Attempting to collect soil samples, they dug into the ground and soon discovered that what they were standing on wasn't actually ground at all. The Navy scientists soon discovered the rocky terrain they were exploring was actually made up entirely of organic matter. As per the standard protocol, the SCP Foundation was forced to silence the U.S. Navy research vessel after its discovery. With the okay from the U.S. government, the ship was torpedoed and sunk to the bottom of the ocean with all hands on deck, in the name of protecting the greater good of the masses. A tragedy at sea for the sake of preventing worldwide pandemonium. From there, the Foundation took over with the containment procedures of what would eventually come to be known as SCP-169, better known by its nickname, the Leviathan. The Leviathan is a biblical creature of mythical proportions, said to be able to boil the seas and create earth-ending floods with just a whip of its massive continent-spanning body. It is unclear if SCP-169 has the ability to do these things, though, given its massive size, which Foundation researchers estimate to be somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 kilometers. It's easy to see how something that big moving at any speed could be devastating for the coastal regions of the world. Although we use the word contain, it is impossible for SCP staff to ever contain something of such massive size. Surveillance and monitoring are about all we can do for now. That and hope it never wakes up and decides that we're on the menu. It was thought to be relatively smooth sailing, until one incident changed everything. Dr. Hart turned off the video monitor and faced the assembled members of MTF Gamma-6, also known as the Deep Feeders, renowned for their specialization in the tracking of deep-sea and oceanic anomalies. The room was dark, and each team member was sitting in shadow, but still Dr. Hart could see the seriousness on their faces. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here at such short notice," he said. On the screen behind him, he put up a NASA satellite picture of a small set of rocky islands. "You see this little island chain here? Well, it wasn't there a week ago." He paused, rubbing his forehead from lack of sleep. "At 8:05 a.m. today, we recorded another auditory anomaly emitting from SCP-169. This one was much louder and longer than the one recorded in 1997 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the one known as the Bloop. Back then, it was easy to brush off as some ice breaking off of a continental shelf and scraping against the seafloor. It's not so easy to cover up anymore. These auditory emissions from SCP-169 are beginning to grow more frequent. More than that, increased seismic activity around the archipelago on the creature's back indicates that the rate at which the creature is breathing is also up. Typically, the rate at which the creature takes what we are assuming to be a breath is once every 3 months. The rate has increased to once every 3 weeks. For as long as we've been monitoring SCP-169, it's been adrift along the southern Atlantic, never moving more than a kilometer a week. That behavior is slowly beginning to change. It doesn't sound like much, but something that big even moving just a fraction of that faster means 100-foot tidal waves for the entire South American coastline. We fear the creature is showing signs of waking up. If this is true, it could mean a cataclysm for the hundreds of nations around the world. Millions, hell, even billions could be wiped off the face of the earth if this thing just flips its body too fast in the wrong direction. To put it to scale, this monster is about the size of the Caribbean, maybe even bigger as far as we know. The doctor then pulled out a decanter of whiskey and poured himself a glass, swallowing the entire pour in one go, in an appalling breach of workplace professionalism. Seriously, an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario is still no excuse for drinking on the job. We're talking about an extinction-level event. A bona fide XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. 1,000-foot tsunami waves stretching as far as the eye can see from either end of the horizon. The last time SCP-169 stirred, it created the Mediterranean. In fact, the legends of the biblical flood, Noah's Ark, the same story can be found in every civilization and culture around the world. So maybe they were onto something. It is to this end I call you all here. To save the world from the next great flood. He paused for a moment as the room took in the gravity of the situation. The more we can learn about SCP-169, the better. And right now, we know squat. For one, we've never seen just how deep the body of the creature goes, or what's under it. The pressure has been too great for our current model submarines, until now. After reinforcing our Nemo-1 deep-sea submersible with thaumaturgical runes, the integrity of its hull has increased exponentially. Your mission will be to travel as far down and as close to the creature as possible. If it breathes, then there must be gills or lungs. There must be some basic biological facts we need to understand if we're going to survive extinction. Our only recourse is to find a way to sedate the creature, and if that doesn't work, then God help us all. Just 12 hours later, deep in the waters of the southern Atlantic, a massive submersible ship was diving down into the depths of the deep ocean, looking for a way to stop the end of the world. Agent Just 6-1, a member of Deep Feeders, looked out of the massive viewing port as the ship slowly descended alongside the rocky trench that made up the body of SCP-169. Behind him was Dr. Hart, sporting a white 5 o'clock shadow and a red nose from a night of drinking to calm his nerves. The entire crew were silent in awe as the giant floodlights of the ship brushed over the barnacle-covered surfaces of the undersea mountain. They progressed slowly, reaching each milestone in depth with caution, knowing that one wrong move could destabilize the pressure in their ship. Just 6-1 murmured the word, "Scales." "What?" asked Dr. Hart. "I've been watching the patterns of the ridges as we sink down. They look like scales. Giant segments. It's hard to see at first because they're so covered in barnacles and sediment, but I'm sure of it. They're giant, armored scales, the way lobsters or crabs have armored exoskeletons." "Interesting," the doctor said, scratching his chin. "Arthropods have segmented armored bodies. This means we might be looking at some sort of evolutionary hybrid, some sort of aquatic mammal such as a whale or dolphin, one that has developed armored segmented scales similar to that of a crustacean." The doctor crossed his arms to think. "The closest thing we have on the fossil record of this magnitude is an armored fish from the Cretaceous period. but even that's way too small to compare to this. This thing has an entire ecosystem on its back.
How old is it?
Asked the agent. Well, now that you mention it, given the impossible age of the creature, an arthropod would make sense. Lobsters and other crustaceans don't age conventionally, you see. They are effectively immortal. In fact, they actually die because they continue to grow until their bodies can't hold up their humongous size anymore. And yet, SCP-169 just kept growing. The doctor trailed off, thinking to himself. Dr. Hart, still lost in thought, turned to walk to the back of the submersible as Zhe 6-1 followed. He said as much to himself as to the agent, "The creature is old. The geological survey conducted when SCP-169 was first discovered carbon-dated the specimen to over 541 million years old. As you can probably surmise, that's too old for any living being. The results had to be incorrect, and yet I checked them myself more than once. And numbers do not lie. The entity predates our civilization. Hell, it predates complex life forms on this planet as we know it. From an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make any sense." The agent, confused, asked, "Doctor, how could something so big even come into existence?" "Very little of our planet is actually landmass. It's a wonder we call it Earth. Most of this planet is water. We aren't looking at a creature that's on our planet, Agent. We are on its planet." Just then a flurry of alarms and sensors began to go off at the bridge of the ship. The team scrambled to their stations, checking off monitors and shouting readings to each other. "The ship's thermal sensors are detecting a massive rise in temperature, transmitting power to cooling systems. We have activity northwest of our location. Sonar has something big headed our way. We need to dive now!" The ship lurched forward, nose first, as everyone on board held on to their seats, the restraints keeping them from falling forward. Just outside of the viewing port, Dr. Hart could see an enormous scaled appendage moving fast in their location. "We need to steer the ship clear of the Talons. Revert all power to the thrusters. Get us out of the way!" the doctor yelled. "Don't you think I'm doing that?" the captain shouted back. The ship jolted sideways and downwards as an immense wave of pressure came over the submersible, putting 6 Gs of force on its occupants. Zhe 6-1 yelped out of fear as the ship came close to crashing into what appeared to be the edge of a titanic talon the size of the Empire State Building. Following the encounter, the part of the ship bordering the reinforced glass of the viewing port began to glow bright red. "It's boiling the water around us!" one of the crew members cried out. "It's not boiling anything, it's just cavitation due to the pressure reduction in the water. The updated runes on the ship's hull should keep us safe, we just need to cool our heads. Stay focused on the mission, bottom feeders." After several moments of holding their breaths, the crew of Nemo 1 began to relax as their pace returned to a slow descent along the side of the underwater behemoth. Before long, the vessel was no longer traveling straight down, but starting to curve under the creature, traveling north towards the theoretical head of SCP-169. After several hours, the ship came upon giant fissures in the rocky exterior of the creature. These massive vent-like structures appeared stiff, but slowly they opened and closed over the span of weeks. These were the respiratory organs of the organism. Clocking it at over 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, the crew carefully began entering the smaller pod-like submersibles that detached from their main ship. Zhe 6-1 entered his pod and strapped on the haptic gloves that would give him control of the pod's robotic arms. He and a team of 3 other volunteers had agreed to undergo the dangerous mission of attaching artificial chemical emission machines that could be programmed to release anesthetic gas into SCP-169's respiratory system on command remotely. The emission machines could be refueled manually whenever the contents ran out. It was an ingenious solution Dr. Hart came up with when thinking of his time studying sharks as a marine biologist. They would tag the fins of sharks by capturing them and bringing the specimens on the deck of their boat. From there, the scientist would drill a radio frequency emitter onto the fin of the shark. When he had first seen this practice as a young college student, Dr. Hart was afraid the process was harming the shark, but later he learned it was designed in a way to not be harmful to the specimen, and eventually the tag would fall off after enough data on the shark's movement was collected. Except these tags would not be falling off, he thought. They could not. For the sake of all mankind, this had to work. The doctor pressed a button on the receiver of the radio and spoke. Zhe 6-1, what's your status? Pressure's holding, all signs look good. Zhe 6-2, pressure's holding, all good. Zhe 6-3, all clear, Captain. Zhe 6-4, There was silence. Just 6-4, do you copy? All clear, Doc. Sorry, my mic was muted. En route and ready to do this thing. Dr. Hart sighed in relief and slowly reclined in his chair, watching the pods move closer to the large openings on SCP-169's side. One by one, the robotic arms used underwater torches to drill into the thick, rock-like exoskeleton of the creature, screwing in complex million-dollar equipment that was both waterproof and could withstand the immense pressure at such a depth under the ocean. As the minutes turned to hours, Dr. Hart couldn't help but feel anxiety for the safety of his crew and the success of the mission. But before long, the pods began to return one by one to the mothercraft, each completing the segment of work with which they were tasked. The last pod still working was just 6-1, whose robotic arm was in the process of rotating a large industrial-sized screw. Just 6-1 had all but finished when suddenly a low rumble could be felt shaking the larger submersible. Dr. Hart's voice came crackling over the radio. "Get back to the ship now!" Just 6-1, wrapped in deep focus on his task, replied, "I'm just about finished, just packing up my tool belt." "Leave it. Return to the ship now. That's an order." "Jesus, what's wrong? It's not like this is the end of the world," said the agent, chuckling over his radio. An ear-piercing echo sent shockwaves through the depths of the ocean around the submersible. The waves rumbled with the sound of SCP-169's voice, similar to the sound of a large whale, but amplified by a million. The sound sent all the crew members falling to the floor as the ship experienced severe damage from the burst of pressure, slightly cracking the glass viewport and sending smoke flooding into the small bridge of the ship. "Gas masks!" shouted Dr. Hart as they all donned breathing apparatus. "SCP-169 is waking up. Begin activation of the chemical emission machines. We need to sedate it now. The Leviathan is waking up. We need to stop it," shouted Dr. Hart. Just then, he looked back and noticed Just 6-1's pod was gone. "Just 6-1, what's your position? Just 6-1, where are you?" "Sir, sonar has him drifting off deeper into the ocean behind us. He must have gotten knocked off SCP-169 by the shockwave." But Dr. Hart wouldn't have it. He didn't want any more blood on his hands. "Reverse thrusters, turn us around and get to him. We're not losing anyone." "But the breach in the hull!" "It'll hold. That's what the runes are for." The outside of the submersible began to glow a slight blue as the ship's system started to come back online to full capacity, and alarm systems started to turn off and report normal pressure readings. Before long, the Nemo 1 had caught up to Just 6-1's pod and retrieved the agent, who had been knocked unconscious by the shockwave. Once the agent was back on the main ship, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitors, making sure the installations they drilled into the creature were functional. Slowly, the machines came online to full power, and the speed at which SCP-169 had been moving began to slow ever so slightly. The team all watched the viewport in silence as a steady stream of anesthetic gas was pumped into the respiratory system of the gigantic living myth in front of them. After a few moments of waiting, the doctor spoke. "I think it worked," he said with a smile. The crew erupted in cheers as they radioed control back up on land that the mission had been a success. The message quickly reached the O5 Council, where a red alert status was de-escalated, and the O5 members withdrew from their plan of leaving the current Earth for that of an alternate universe. The whole crew began to sing and celebrate the prevention of the end of the world, as Dr. Hart simply stood in front of the massive viewport, watching the mountainous specimen slowly grow smaller in the distance as the submersible began ascending back to the world above. Just 6-1 came over to congratulate him, patting him on the back. "We did it," he said. "Loosen up." The doctor managed to laugh along in acknowledgement. "That we did," he said in relief. "That we did." The two watched the deep blue ocean in silence, taking in the vastness of the sea. Perhaps this would not be the end of it, but that day, they had done what the SCP Foundation did best: kick that apocalyptic can a few miles down the road. And sometimes, in the face of the terrifying and the infinite, that's really the best you can do. Congratulations! You've just entered the employ of the SCP Foundation as a junior researcher. As you know, the Foundation doesn't just hand out positions like this to anyone. To get scouted as part of their research corps, you need to be one of the best and brightest. You're going to be working with strange, mind-bending, and sometimes even deadly anomalies on a daily basis. You're part of the thin, redacted line between normalcy and absolute chaos of the supernatural. But right now, only one question is on your mind. Where will you actually be working? Because here's the thing. The SCP Foundation is a worldwide organization devoted to the containment of the anomalous, and they have thousands of classified sites and areas across the globe, each of them specializing in a different subset of the strange. Depending on your particular area of expertise, there's a number of Foundation facilities you may hope to be assigned to, but that's not what we're talking about today. Instead, we're focusing on the sites and areas so dangerous that just getting assigned there feels kind of like a demotion to D-Class. The places with the deadliest anomalies and the most frightening locales. That's right. It's time to cross your fingers and hope for the best. Because today we're going to discuss the most dangerous SCP Foundation sites and areas. But first, there are some things we need to understand about Foundation facilities in general. If you're somewhat familiar with the world of the SCP Foundation, you've probably heard phrases like research site and biological containment area thrown around a lot. You may have even picked up most of the meanings from context clues. But before we throw you into even more dangerous, uncharted waters, we're gonna break down the labels for you. The Foundation has secure facilities all over the world, and they deal with a wide range of different anomalies. So these facilities often have to specialize to suit the requirements of their specific task. For starters, the terms site and area aren't interchangeable. Sites are covert Foundation facilities that often exist relatively close to civilian populations, so as not to arouse suspicion from the public or rival groups like the Chaos Insurgency. They disguise themselves as boring government and corporate buildings. Areas, on the other hand, typically have to contain much more dangerous anomalies. Areas tend to not only be much larger than sites, they're also further away from civilian population centers. There's no cover story here. The areas are just entirely hidden. They also often have some pretty crazy failsafe measures in case of a large containment breach, like one or even multiple thermonuclear warheads designed to detonate and blow the facility to Kingdom Come, if things ever get truly out of control. It goes without saying that you'd probably rather be assigned to a site rather than an area, if you're risk-adverse. Both types of facilities are divided into sections or sectors, which in some cases are further divided into units. Units typically are small, high-security areas devoted to the extensive containment of a single anomaly, or several closely related anomalies. Now that you know the two types of facilities, let's talk prefixes. The handy little descriptor that often clues you in to how a Foundation site or area has specialized. There are 10 possible prefixes for a facility, and we'll take you on a quick crash course through those before we start getting dangerous. Armed, as in armed site, armed area, or armed section, refers to a facility or section that possesses a large quantity of firepower and could mean military-grade weaponry, vehicles, or just a large number of permanent armed guards. Armed facilities tend to be more dangerous to work in, either due to a greater threat of containment breach or due to a high possibility of attacks from the outside. Biological or bio implies that the facility or area deals with infectious or biohazardous anomalies that would make catching the Black Plague feel like a spa day. Containment is an obvious one. These sites or areas that are, you guessed it, built for containing anomalies. Dimensional containment facilities or sections often contain dangerous pocket dimensions, or gateways into other dimensions. Humanoid containment facilities or sections deal largely with intelligent human or human-like anomalies, capable of understanding and following instructions. They're similar to standard prisons, but for anomalous people. Protected facilities and sections are anomaly-free safe zones, so we won't be discussing them much here. Provisional facilities are typically temporary facilities built around an anomaly that couldn't be feasibly transported to a pre-existing facility. The rare reliquary facilities or sections are designed to hold anomalous artifacts of a religious or historical nature. Research facilities or sections either research the anomalies themselves or work on devising new containment methods. And storage facilities are designed to store non-anomalous items long-term. The Foundation also has observation outposts, but with some rare exceptions, your greatest risk at one of these is dying of boredom. With that out of the way, let's get to what we've all been waiting for. the scariest, deadliest, and most overall dangerous facilities on the Foundation roster. The places you'd never want to be assigned to if your life depended on it. And in this case, it really does. First, we'll discuss the most dangerous sites, and then the most dangerous areas. So grab your Foundation-issued sidearm, and let's go. First, Site 19. It shouldn't be surprised that the largest operating Foundation site is also the one containing some of the most famous and deadly prisoners. Two in particular are the one you can't look away from, and another that puts you in lifelong mortal danger if you look at it. These are SCP-173 the Sculpture and SCP-689 the Statue of Death. If you get assigned to Site 19, there's a possibility you may suddenly find yourself with a snapped neck while filling in spreadsheets. And if you so much take a glance at SCP-689, you'll be declared an E-Class, and possibly even terminated by your superiors. Second, Provisional Site 4511, home of SCP-4511, also known as the Swine God. This giant pig-shaped furnace has had a terrifying effect on the Foundation personnel stationed at the site. In just a few weeks, it had seemingly rational researchers and guards performing brutal sacrifices in its name and descending into an occult hell. It's happened at least once already, and is extremely likely to happen again, so you definitely want to avoid being deployed here. But the most deadly site of all is one that doesn't even come from our universe. Site 13, also known as SCP-1730. This site, run by Director Elliot Emerson, functioned like an anomaly slaughterhouse in another dimension. Anomalies were murdered and burned, and dissenting Foundation employees were treated horrifically. But when Director Emerson happened to turn on the reality-warping Thresher machine, this site became a full-blown nightmare filled with escaped SCPs, mimetic hazards, otherworldly nightmare gods, and a truly unsavory entity nicknamed Leech Boy, who is quite interested in drinking your blood. If you can even survive long enough in Site 13 to meet him, that is. Of course, it's the secure Foundation areas where the horrors really unfold. These can make some of the worst sites look mild in comparison. Let's take a look at some of the Foundation's most dangerous areas. First, Containment Area 25B. This area is not only 200 meters beneath the ocean, it's also one of the most heavily fortified, and one of the few to actually detonate its on-site nuclear warhead in the past. That's because this is the containment area for SCP-076, also known as Able. This anomaly has frequent and extreme violent containment breach attempts, often brutally slaughtering staff in the process with his deft swordsmanship. Accepting a job here is a great way to fast-track yourself into becoming human sushi. Next up is Area 354. This facility houses SCP-354, also known as the Blood Pond, a slowly expanding pool of red liquid that habitually unleashes dangerous monsters that attack the guards stationed there. These include giant bats, huge metal spheres releasing concentrated radiation beams, a giant reptilian humanoid impervious to gunfire, and an invisible robotic Terminator entity that managed to murder 90% of the attending guards before being killed itself. In other words, not a recipe for stable employment. Area 126 is dangerous for a number of reasons. First, that it's located inside war-torn Damascus, Syria, and thus sometimes come under threat from shelling operations. Second, because it contains SCP-3989. This spatial anomaly in the middle of an olive orchard turned out to be a front for a terrifying Sarkic dimension full of fleshy abominations. What's more, simply being in this area slowly caused the staff to lose their minds and become devoted to the Sarkic deities hidden within the dimension. And much like the Blood Pond, it's believed that this area of influence is actively growing day by day. Meaning if you work at Area 126, it's actually getting less safe with each moment that passes. Next, Arm Reliquary and Containment Area 02. This space is specifically designed to contain highly dangerous, hostile, or otherwise hazardous anomalies, including multiple Keter-class objects. And we're not kidding when we say dangerous and hostile. The anomalies housed on this site are so dangerous, there's a literal battalion of armed guards to keep the peace. It also has not one, but multiple fail-safe nuclear weapons, designed to literally erase the entire base from existence if ever there's a catastrophic containment breach. One particularly horrifying anomaly in Area 02 is SCP-743. This is a seemingly innocent chocolate fountain that actually contains billions of extremely violent ant-like creatures that will swarm anything nearby, tearing it to pieces and dragging the pieces back to their nest inside the fountain. These insects will stop at nothing and can even tear through titanium if they need to in order to get their desired sustenance. So being present in this area means your life is constantly at risk. Hope you like chocolate. Next is the dreaded Armed Biological Containment Area 14, which contains some of the deadliest biological anomalies out there, from the bloodthirsty, kill-crazed Heart of Darkness SCP-058, to the head-devouring cannibal giant SCP-082, to the voice-imitating, memory-wiping Red Pack Hunters SCP-939. This base also houses several fast-breeding killer parasites, and a few highly infectious and deadly diseases. While Area 14 does boast an entire army of guards with heavy military hardware for preventing all these terrifying monsters from breaching containment and causing havoc, that probably won't make you feel much better. If even one of these things escapes at any given time, you better hope for your family's sake that you have a good life insurance policy. And finally, Area 37. As it stands, being sent to this area pretty much guarantees either death or a fate even worse than dying. That's because Area 37 is no longer under the control of the SCP Foundation. Instead, it's become a twisted playground for SCP-1765, a trio of terrifying reality warpers known as the Sisters. These unstoppable monsters claimed the area as their own, and began performing sickening experiments such as being forced into maddening time loops designed to drive you insane, or being crushed and burned to death in deadly games with confusing rules. While heading into other areas offers the possibility of a gruesome fate, Area 37 offers a dead certainty. Now, not only do you know the difference between different types of sites and areas, you now know some of the most horrifying and deadly examples of each, so you know which to avoid. But look on the bright side. If you're hard up for work and the SCP Foundation seems like an appealing job, at least you know there will likely always be a position available at one of these sites. After all, positions here open up very frequently. The smell of fire and oil fills the air. The sound of gears grinding can be heard between the explosions and shrieks of terror. A man runs out of his house, only to have his leg grabbed by a metal arm and dragged back through his front door. SCP-001 leaves a trail of metal fragments and mechanical parts on the ground in the wake of its destruction. Iron chains swing from its form, cast iron gears whirl within it, a glowing light throbs from the center of its body. SCP-001 is consuming everything in its path. After incorporating the truck chassis into its being, SCP-001 rolls in a lumbering fashion to the next house. It rips the gutters from the side of the building. Residents who live in the area flee their neighborhood, all the while hoping that the mechanical monstrosity skips over their house, so they have something to return to if they make it out alive. A section of SCP-001's undercarriage drops away from the main body. It rolls down the street, consuming more and more material. The new entity resembles a human spine and rib cage. It topples over, unable to support itself. The rib-like formations extend out to grab anything and everything within reach. The newly incorporated material forms what can only be described as a head. Light from within the eye sockets fixate on nearby civilians. The metallic creature picks up the people and places them inside its exposed steel ribcage. Then it turns and spots a woman helplessly trying to crawl away. The creature reaches out with a spiked tentacle and wraps it around the woman's body. She is placed inside of the chest cavity. Moments later, a severed hand falls out of the entity and onto the ground. The mechanical monster continues to gather bodies and materials, incorporating them into its frame. A growth begins to slowly expand on its back. It becomes so massive that the creature falls over and uses its limbs to scurry to a nearby house. There is a sickening crunching sound as the growth bursts. From within emerges 3 humanoid creatures resembling the civilians that the entity had consumed earlier. A female with chains extending from her scalp like dreadlocks stumbles away. The second humanoid is a man with cogs for limbs. He examines the clock-like components that have been incorporated into his body, then stares blankly into the distance. The third humanoid lies motionless on the ground. He did not make it. The 2 functioning humanoids look at their creator intently. For a moment, nothing moves. Then, as if they have been given orders telepathically, the half-human, half-machine humanoids turn and run away from the mayhem. A few weeks before the massacre caused by what would be designated as SCP-001, the Foundation had been in contact with the Allied Occult Initiative. There were rumors of an anomalous object in Mexico being worshipped by a group of people who identified themselves as the Church of the Broken God. Intel about the church claimed their deity was a small mechanical box filled with cogs and pistons. The box supposedly had supernatural abilities. It was said to be able to communicate with congregants of the Church of the Broken God telepathically. The devout worshipped the box, following any order it gave, and in return they were filled with an emotion that could be only described as divine. As World War II rages on in Europe, the Foundation sends agents to recover anomalies in Mexico that might help with the war effort. While there, the Foundation force is tasked with learning about the Church of the Broken God. They are also ordered to investigate a town near La Paz, where there are troubling accounts of a mechanical anomalous creature causing mayhem. The agents make their way through Mexico, gathering various objects to bring back to Foundation sites in the United States. The unit loads all of the anomalies they recovered onto a train, with a plan to check out the stories of the mechanical anomaly they've heard about as they make their way to the US border. The train heads north along rusted rails. Just outside La Paz, they've come across a broken down train filled with what looks to be refugees. When the Foundation unit goes to investigate, they find all of the refugees repeating the same words over and over again, but they don't understand. The Foundation agents look at one another confused, until one of them translates the words into English. The words the refugees are saying over and over again are La Máquina, the machine. The commanding officer orders a squad of Foundation agents to proceed up the tracks, to see if they can figure out what has the refugees so scared. They make their way towards La Paz, disappearing over the horizon. As the sun sets, the remaining Foundation agents hear gunshots in the distance. They stay awake all night, remaining vigilant, waiting for the exploratory squad, but morning comes without anyone returning. 3 days later, the Foundation force still has not seen anything since the exploratory squad left. Then, as the sun sits lazily in the morning sky, a lone figure is spotted walking down the tracks towards the trains. One of the agents on watch blows his whistle and points to the figure. A squad of agents rushes towards the shadow of a man. Their guns are raised, ready for anything. The figure drops to the ground and begins to crawl along the tracks. The agents reach the fallen man, only to find that he is one of their squad mates who has been sent up the tracks to investigate La Paz several days before. The agent's name is DeMarco. He is covered in blood. His clothes are in tatters and he has lost a boot. DeMarco lies on his back with Foundation agents standing around him. His eyes are wide and wild. He keeps babbling on about a world eater, how the rest of his squad had been mulched, and he is the only one who made it out alive. The Foundation agents carry DeMarco back to the makeshift base they created by the trains. They need to figure out a way to get the convoy moving again, but whatever is up ahead has already taken out an entire Foundation squad. It had to be something anomalous, but what could it possibly be? The unit of Foundation agents prepare to move towards La Paz. They start loading their rifles and check the amount of ammunition and explosives available in case the containment process gets out of hand. Just as they are about to leave the base, a convoy appears on the horizon. It is an Allied Occult Initiative force preparing to attack whatever it is that is devastating La Paz. This organization's mission is to not secure, contain, or protect, but to destroy. The Foundation may be in over their heads on this one, and the joint force with the Allied Occult Initiative may be the only way to stop what is now known as SCP-001. The AOI and Foundation force gears up for battle. They set out for La Paz, and what they find causes them to quake with fear. SCP-001 has consumed so much material, it is the size of a mountain. It moves like a tidal wave of mechanical destruction, washing over the buildings and landscape under it. Whatever SCP-001 passes over is consumed and added to its massive body. SCP-001 started as a small mechanical box with cogs, but now has morphed into a gigantic metal death machine. The Church of the Broken God has finally met their maker, as the small entity they once worshipped has now consumed all of its members. Their god is an all-consuming monster. The AOI and Foundation forces do everything they can to stop SCP-001 from continuing its reign of destruction. They fire barrage after barrage of bullets and explosives into the mechanical anomaly. They bring in air support to try and damage it from the skies, but nothing works. The AOI uses an artifact in their possession to lure SCP-001 to the coast of the Pacific Ocean, where a trap has been set for the so-called god. The monstrous mechanical creature moves slowly towards the water. It consumes abandoned cars, buildings, and boats as it approaches the coastline. It even shovels large amounts of earth into its form, causing flames to spurt out from its inner workings. Smoke bellows from openings between different mechanical components, like a volcano before it is about to erupt. Suddenly, seemingly from nowhere, a massive cloud with a reddish tint appears in the sky. Air raid sirens can be heard in the distance. The enormous cloud begins to pulsate. Streaks of lightning shoot through the red mist in the sky. It now sits directly over SCP-001. From within the cloud, part of a ship can be seen. It appears to be slightly damaged. Electricity flows over its hull. The vessel in the giant red cloud is classified as SCP-2399. The underside of the vessel begins to glow aqua blue. A blinding beam of light is ejected from SCP-2399, which penetrates straight down and through SCP-001. For a moment, everything is still. There is complete silence. Then, as if SCP-001 is trying to reach up and grab the vessel above it, a mechanical bulge reaches out. Before SCP-001 can grab the vessel above, there is another bright flash of light. SCP-2399 blinks out of existence. The sound of grinding gears can be heard coming from within SCP-001. It begins to shed its outer layers of metal. Then the entire structure that was SCP-001 collapses into the water and onto the beach. Giant cogs fall from the sky. Parts of vehicles embed themselves in the sand. As the Foundation and AOI agents approach the piles of scrap metal and mechanical components, they see that some of them are still moving. It is as if an invisible power source is still pulsating through some of the machinery. The agents of the Foundation celebrate the destruction of the giant mechanical beast, but little do they know this was only a piece of the entity worshipped as the Broken God. The Foundation agents collect as many of the still moving parts as they can. They find spinning gears, twitching pulleys, and firing pistons. As the parts are separated from one another and carried away from the main wreckage of SCP-001, they slowly stop moving and become inactive. Some of the artifacts recovered were identified as being connected to the Church of the Broken God. These artifacts are found closer to the middle of what was once a mountain-sized SCP-001. Hundreds of anomalous artifacts are collected and transported to SCP Foundation sites. Collecting the broken parts of SCP-001 is relatively safe. However, some agents get too close to the larger moving parts, getting caught in them and losing a body part or two. But most agents proceed with caution and survive the collection ordeal with their arms and legs still attached to their bodies. Dive teams are sent into the water to recover parts that have sunk to the bottom of the sea. One of the divers is a local from the area. He is hired to bring up the heart of the machine, since he is an experienced diver used to freediving to great depths to collect oysters from the bottom of the bay. The diver enters the water and swims down into the murky depths. He secures straps around the heart of SCP-001 and pulls hard on the rope, as an indication to the surface that it is ready to be hauled up. The salvage team on the surface begins to pull. There is a second slight tug on the rope, then it goes slack. The team continues to pull. When they get the heart to the surface, they are horrified at what else comes up with it. Tangled in the ropes is the lifeless body of the diver. His head is smashed between two moving pieces of the heart. It looks as if he shoved his head between the slabs of metal himself. The salvage team untangles the body, rolls it off the deck, and back into the ocean. The mechanical box, which was the heart of SCP-001, is offloaded on the shore, but as the Foundation prepares to move it to a containment facility, the weather starts to deteriorate. Hurricane-force winds sweeps across the water and batter the coast. The heart is kept in a secured storage warehouse until it can be moved. The people living in the village nearby complain of hearing voices and rashes so itchy that they practically tear their skin off. Once the storm passes, the Foundation agents load the heart onto a ship. It is to be transported to a Foundation site just across the border. The ocean seems calm and serene. The Foundation ship undocks and begins its journey up the coast. Not too long after beginning its journey, the ship slowly drifts off course. It is as if the crew has stopped manning their posts, and the ship is being controlled by a mind of its own. The Foundation ship crashes and sinks somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, never to be found. And most importantly, the heart of SCP-001 doesn't make it to the Foundation site. Years later, a man is walking along the beach. He hears something. It sounds like someone pounding on a large drum to the rhythm of a heartbeat. The man walks towards the sound. Something is drawing him forward, closer and closer to the heartbeat. He walks and walks until the beating stops. He bends down and moves the sand aside. He spots the corner of a mechanical box sticking out of the white sand. The man digs deeper and pulls out the small box. Inside, he can see gears whirling and pistons firing. He holds the box close to his own heart. It seems to speak to him. The man brings the box back to town. He starts to worship the box, and soon more and more people in the area join the new religion. They cast aside their own beliefs and focus on the powerful entity contained within the box. God is not dead, at least not yet. But the prophecies of the Church of the Broken God say that when the heart is found, the God will reassemble itself once again. Then the unbroken God will destroy all other false deities until only he remains. It was July of 2004, and Bill Murray was enjoying the peak of an extremely successful career. Not only had the iconic actor starred in some of the most beloved comedies of the 20th century, including Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, he'd voiced the main character of the recently released live-action Garfield movie. It'd been a financial success, but it was a critical flop. Not that this bothered Bill. He was happy with the performance and the paycheck. What he wouldn't be quite as happy about was the horrifying encounter he was about to have with SCP-3166. On July 8th, Bill was enjoying a cold drink on the porch of his luxurious Beverly Hills home. The sky was beginning to darken as the sun set in the west. It was a blissful evening. His wife Jennifer was inside, watching TV. Nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary until he noticed a quick flash of orange in the distance. It was almost too fast to register, this large orange shape darting past the corner of his eye. For a second, he entertained the thought that it might have been an escaped tiger, but it was gone too fast to really tell. Bill finished his drink and headed inside. He had enough for one night. The next morning, he got up to read the paper and found the Garfield movie getting slaughtered by the critics. One review stated, "No one can accuse Garfield the movie of infidelity to its source. It faithfully conveys the banality of Jim Davis's cartoon." Another called it, "a film without energy and without spirit." He put the paper down and ate his breakfast. A few blows to the ego were worth it for the paydays that came with big-budget family films. Just then, his wife came to him with a strange question. "Were you walking around downstairs in the middle of the night?" No, he hadn't. He'd been sleeping like a baby. Why did she ask? "Well," Jennifer said, "I heard some rustling downstairs last night. It sounded like something big." He hadn't heard anything though, and told her it was probably just her imagination. He put it out of his mind and continued about his day. He decided he would keep his eyes peeled for that orange blur again though. Bill didn't see anything peculiar the rest of the morning and went to a local cafe for lunch. He ordered a coffee and a cream cheese bagel, then made a quick trip to the bathroom while his food was prepared. When Bill returned to his table though, there was something strange. Instead of a bagel, there was a large heaping of lasagna on the table. What was going on? This cafe didn't even serve lasagna. Bill knew something was terribly wrong. Things only got stranger when Bill came home to find a small tuft of orange fur snagged on the frame of his front door. And it wasn't synthetic fur like you'd see on plush toys or stuffed animals. No, this was real animal fur. Maybe someone was just goofing off or trying to play some weird prank on him. But it didn't feel like it. Deep down, Bill Murray knew that he was in grave danger. Whoever or whatever was behind this, it wanted to hurt him. That night, his worst fears were realized. Bill's wife had left town for the week, and he was headed to the kitchen in the middle of the night for a glass of water when he saw something, a huge figure moving up against the glass door leading to his backyard. The thing was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, with a bloated, fur-covered, misshapen body that was pressed up against the door. Its fur was bright, garish orange, a cartoon orange. Strangest of all, though, was the sound it was making. It sounded like it was purring. Bill backed away from the door and then ran back to his room to hide. The whole night he sat cowering as he heard scratching against the walls, like something was trying to get in. He was terrified and too scared to do anything, even move. Finally, as morning broke, the noises seemed to stop. Bill had to do something. He couldn't let this nightmare go on another night. What if things got worse? What if that thing managed to get inside? He called the local police, and when they arrived, he explained the incredibly strange situation as best he could. He told them he was being stalked by some kind of huge cat, or at least someone dressed like a huge cat. Also, there was lasagna involved. The officers interviewing him could barely contain their laughter as he told them his story. A giant orange cat? Perhaps, one of them theorized, he angered some kind of obsessive Garfield fan through his involvement in the live-action movie. After all, the original comic had been running for years and had been extremely popular. Who knows what kind of nutjobs were obsessed with seeing only a faithful adaptation of the source material. As the officers departed, Bill was confident that they weren't taking him seriously. He couldn't rely on any of them for protection. Thankfully, from a multi-decade movie career, he had plenty of disposable income and decided to hire a private security team to protect him while he looked into this mystery. He had 2 trained bodyguards positioned around his home at all times for the next month. They were armed and given the cryptic orders to fire on anything orange. Meanwhile, Bill began to fall down a Garfield rabbit hole. He felt strangely compelled to research all the Garfield media he could find, as though the answer to his terrifying situation was somehow hidden between the lines. Bill explored the entire backlog of thousands of comic strips. He read the books and interviews with Jim Davis. He watched the cartoons and straight-to-DVD animated movies. Ironically, for a guy who'd recently portrayed the lasagna-loving orange cat, Bill had never felt quite so immersed in the character before. He found the strange pathos in the routine of Garfield and his friends. One particular comic really piqued his interest, though. Originally published in October of 1989, the comic began with Garfield being woken up by a strange chill, an almost eerie sensation. The character observed aloud that he didn't feel like he was in his own home. He explored his little home further, trying to find his owner John or his housemaid and sometimes nemesis Odie, but found nothing. As Garfield remarked on feeling alone, a purple speech box delivered the sinister message. "You have no idea how alone you are, Garfield." He then finds that his home looks like it's been abandoned for years. The for sale sign outside is practically ancient. Garfield slowly comes to a horrifying revelation. Everyone really is gone, and his adventures and friends now exist only in his imagination. He's trapped in a prison of his own creation, trying to stave off his endless loneliness, in denial about the reality of his situation. The comic ended with a quote directly from Jim Davis himself saying, "An imagination is a powerful tool. It can tint memories of the past, shade perceptions of the present, or paint a future so vivid that it can entice or terrify, all depending upon how we conduct ourselves today." As he read those words, Bill Murray felt a chill down his spine. Why had he wanted to get involved in the Garfield movie in the first place? What had he gotten himself into? Before he could slip any deeper into his own mind, Bill heard a faint, choked scream downstairs. He felt his breath catch in his throat. He was terrified, but needed to see what was happening. He carefully and quietly began to creep down the stairs. At the bottom, he poked his head around a corner, and that's when he saw a member of his security detail lying dead on the floor. His face was blue from asphyxiation. His mouth was stuffed with lasagna. It looked like he had been force-fed to death. Bill wanted to scream, but he couldn't, or maybe knew he shouldn't. Just then he heard a soft, meaty thumping noise coming from the nearby living room. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to approach, as if by forces beyond his control. He made his way to the living room, and when he'd got there, he saw where the noise was coming from. Bill's jaw dropped in pure horror. There was the other member of his security detail, lying limp and lifeless under a giant orange figure. It was a grotesquely huge creature, wearing what looked to be a kind of crude Garfield outfit made of sewn-together cat pelts. It stank of pasta and rotten meat. In its giant paw, it held a golden trophy, which it was using to pound the security guard's head into mush, while making quiet, cat-like purring noises. The creature suddenly stopped and looked up, locking eyes with Bill. The fear of death came over him. He froze as the giant, freakish Garfield stepped over Donnie's corpse and began to come towards him. Bill turned and ran, but Garfield was gaining on him. Before he could make it to the front door, the creature knocked him over. He was laid out on the ground, looking up at it as it reached into its own body cavity and began to pull out handfuls of lasagna. He was about to shove a wad of the horrible, decaying pasta into Bill's mouth when suddenly a ding was heard, and the creature stopped. It looked up, as if sniffing the air, and then suddenly turned and lumbered towards the kitchen. Bill watched as the Garfield monster entered the kitchen, where somehow there was a steaming hot fresh lasagna sitting in the open oven. The creature had sensed the presence of external lasagna and felt the compulsion to integrate it into its body, grabbing fistfuls and shoving it into itself. Just then, a group of highly trained SCP Foundation personnel burst into the room and subdued the creature. It had been an ambush. The Foundation had been tipped off to the presence of the creature by monitoring the local police department dispatches, and the report of a 7-foot-tall comic book cat terrorizing a Hollywood actor was definitely worth looking into. The monster that had almost taken Bill Murray's life was SCP-3166, a deadly pataphysical being that tends to manifest around people somehow involved in the Garfield intellectual property. It appears whenever the public perception of Garfield falls out of favor, and because Bill had starred in the critically panned Garfield movie, he was currently at the very top of SCP-3166's hit list. Thankfully, he managed to survive his terrifying ordeal, and was administered amnestics by Foundation personnel so that he could return to his normal life. This frightening and mysterious creature has been around since 1989, appearing after the publication of the haunting Garfield comic that Bill had read that very night. It appeared in the office of United Media, who were the publishers of the Garfield comic strip at the time, and began wreaking havoc. Since then, the creature's manifestation has been a constant threat whenever Garfield loses its popularity or audience. As a result, the Foundation has spent years as the funding source behind all Garfield media, and even planting hypnotic mimetics into the comic strips to ensure that there is always a loyal fan base. The fur is indeed real organic cat fur, albeit an unnaturally orange color, and instead of organs, the creature is filled with lasagna. Worst of all, though, is that testing has revealed that the meat in the lasagna is genetically identical to the flesh of Garfield's creator, Jim Davis. How did this thing come into existence? Perhaps it was Jim's sheer force of imagination that dragged it into being. As he himself said, an imagination is a powerful tool. All in all, it's lucky that Bill Murray was able to survive his encounter and return to his normal life. Well, as normal as life can be for Bill Murray. And if you see Bill Murray, don't bother asking him about SCP-3166. The amnestics were quite effective. And just as he's fond of saying himself, no one will ever believe you. It was dark when you arrived at the office. Rain hammered down on the window pane, cold as death. Your therapist didn't expect a frantic call from you in the middle of the night, but he learned to take such surprises as they came. You called and drove over the second you had the dream. That terrible, terrible dream. He was sitting at his desk. When you entered the room, he gestured to the couch, encouraging you to take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Your heart was beating so hard you were worried it might break your ribs. Every time you blinked, you were getting flashes of the faces, those vacant, grinning faces, with wide eyes and mouths wrenched open, hanging slack. You hoped to whatever god or gods you believed in to never see those images outside of a dream. "What's been troubling you this time?" he asked. "I must admit, I'm getting a little worried about you. You seem so frantic over the phone." You tried your best to settle your breathing for long enough to speak, at which point you said the words you were hoping you'd never have to say again. I had a dream about Cragglewood Park. You could almost hear the sigh your therapist was desperately trying to conceal from you. You'd been making so much progress, processing and working to move beyond that mysterious trauma. But then the dreams had come back, just as forceful and terrifying as they ever were. Your therapist asked you to recount it, just like he did so many times before. But of course, it's always the same. In the dream, you were a child, probably about 6 or 7, walking down a long, cobbled path, surrounded on all sides by these trees that looked like eerie amusement park animatronics. They had these big, rubbery faces, stretched into eerie smiles, like something off the cover of an old children's book. The Craggle trees. You somehow knew deep down in your heart that this was what the trees were called. This was, after all, Cragglewood Park. Those words, in whimsical cursive letters, were written on an aging sign somewhere deep in your mind. You could remember it as clearly as your own mother's face. And you weren't alone here in Cragglewood Park. There were other children, wandering down that cobbled road like a lost scene from The Wizard of Oz. The trees grinned and gyrated and sang up against a painted forest background. Wait, was it painted? Or did it just seem somehow unreal? The memories were getting hazy here. The same goes for the faces of the other children. They were smudged out, forgotten. Why were you here? Why were any of you here? And where were your parents in all this? But those thoughts were blotted out by the singing of those awful trees. You couldn't remember the words, but the music was so clear. The haunting notes of a calliope organ, like a collapsing memory of a day at the circus. You and the other children were all walking in the same direction, as though in a trance. What were you walking towards? The calliope only got louder with every step. A boy with a smudged-out face to the left of you tried to speak, but his words were muffled. You couldn't hear anything over the music and the terrible, garbled singing of all the animatronic trees. Then there were glowing lights and colors as you approached the end of the road. Something big, moving in time to the music. A grand, old carousel, slowly grinding to a halt to let on the next wave of children. You and the others just stood there and watched it. Moments later, half of the crowd of assembled children, the boy standing next to you included, began to step onto the carousel. The light got brighter and the singing got louder. By the time you reached the end of recounting your dream to your therapist, you realized that your cheeks were wet with tears. You told him you'd do anything to get the dreams to stop. Anything. Your therapist just nodded and made a note in his journal. "I'll get in touch with someone who specializes in this kind of thing," he said. "Try to get some rest in the meantime. It can be detrimental to obsess about this kind of thing." But how could you not obsess? The second you got home, you did what you always did after having another Cragglewood Park dream. You went straight to the forums. After all, the most frightening thing about the Cragglewood dream was the fact that you weren't the only one having it. A number of people had congregated on a niche online paranormal forum to discuss their eerily similar experiences. Dreams filled with singing uncanny trees, half-forgotten children, and the hazy horrors of Cragglewood Park. Each member of the forum alerted the others whenever they had the dream again and threw any new information into the pot. They came from all over the world, different ages, backgrounds, and countries, making it impossible that they'd all actually visited a place like Cragglewood Park at some point in their past. And really the only thing they had in common, other than the dream itself, was the fact that they were all only children while in them. None of them could explain the dream. Perhaps with almost 8 billion people on Earth, it could be a coincidence that this handful would have these peculiar dreams. Perhaps that's all it was. Strange dreams. A few days later, a stranger arrived at your door, telling you that they were referred to you by your therapist. They heard about the dreams, about Cragglewood Park. In fact, they dealt with similar cases in the past, and if you'd be willing to answer a few questions, they may even have a viable treatment for the strange dreams that have been assailing you for years now. What could go wrong? Anything that could stop you from seeing those awful tree faces would be good. You relayed everything that you'd previously told your therapist, every detail of the dream, the rough number of times it reoccurred, and even the support group for the other sufferers that you frequented online. After you answered all of the strangers' questions, they told you that in order to seek treatment for your strange dreams, you would only need to show up at a nearby building and tell them who you are. They told you that this is a highly confidential and experimental procedure, so it would need to be kept secret. You sign a non-disclosure agreement and happily submit to all their conditions. You'll do anything to stop dreaming about Cragglewood Park, even agree to what you don't know is amnestic treatment from the SCP Foundation, or testing to see if erasing memories can suppress the Cragglewood Park dreams. You were among the first group of guinea pigs for that experiment. But hey, if it works, right? And for a few weeks, it did. You submitted yourself to regular amnestic treatment sessions at a local Foundation front business disguised as a legitimate medical center. You were skeptical at first. You'd tried every therapy and over-the-counter sleeping pill you could get your hands on. You tried meditation, regression, hypnosis, positive subliminals. Nothing had banished down the haunting dreams of Cragglewood Park. Those trees, those faces, those awful tinny songs. But to your immense relief, this new course of treatment seemed to hold strong. While taking the medication given to you by the Foundation, you got your best nights of sleep in years. A whole new world of comfort and peace. But then came a problem. There were supply issues. You'd need to take a few weeks off the course. And just as soon as you stopped taking the regular course of medications, the second your head hit the pillow and you drifted off to sleep, you were right back in Cragglewood Park. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. Perhaps the nightmares would go on forever. You'd spend every evening with those other faceless children always wondering, who were they? What happened to them? Little did you know there were no supply issues. The Foundation just wanted to test the viability of amnestic treatment as a long-term solution to the Cragglewood Park dreams, or as they dubbed them, SCP-2571. Turns out the amnestics were only effective when the subjects of SCP-2571 were actively taking them. Given the Foundation tests have estimated around 0.05% of the world's population are affected by SCP-2571, with that number possibly on the rise by unknown means, consistent amnestic treatment for all affected was deemed to not be a viable solution. But if it's any consolation to you, you're not suffering alone. The SCP Foundation has an online bot known as I.O. Mandela, trawling the internet for any discussions relevant to SCP-2571. They also have a designated task force, MTF-57, also known as the Laughingstock, to investigate and follow up on cases related to the sinister Cragglewood Park. The Foundation has conducted thousands of interviews related to the subject, but only 3 are appended to the file, containing between them some revelations on Cragglewood Park that reveal it's actually far, far worse than a childish bad dream. Dr. Rayner, the research team leader for SCP-2571, conducted the first of the 3 pertinent interviews about SCP-2571, investigating the experience of one Rupert Ducasse. In many ways, Rupert's Cragglewood Park dreams were truly textbook ventures into this nightmare of an amusement park. He described venturing through the park saying, "I entered this theme park. It's like Disneyland but smaller. There's no rides, just this long winding road through the woods. Everything's bright and colorful like a cartoon. And then there's these trees all around me, but they've all got faces. And they're singing. They've got these dopey, cheerful looks, like in one of those old-time cartoons, right? And they just sing and laugh and sing." Like all the other accounts, he reported approaching a carousel with the other children. Half of the children got onto the carousel, and he and the others began to leave. At this point, Rupert became visibly distressed while recounting the tale and said, "Just as I'm getting ready to leave, I see something. A tiny tree sprouting up near my foot. It looks up at me. It's smiling with that big, dopey, happy grin. When I see it, that's when I start screaming. That's when I wake up." When Dr. Rayner asked Rupert why he started screaming, Rupert replied that the tree had his face. The interview concluded. Next, Dr. Rayner spoke to Janny Yearling, another victim of SCP-2571. Dr. Rayner shifted his line of questioning to the carousel specifically. Miss Yearling insisted that she never stepped onto the carousel herself. Some who did were smiling, others were crying. They hugged some of the children that chose to stay behind before they got on. The more she described what happened, the more distressed Miss Yearling seemed to become. She eventually broke down into mortified sobs from the recollection. When Dr. Rainier asked what was wrong, Miss Yearling said, one of the kids that got on. Why did he hug me? I don't even know who he was. Before breaking down into horribly desperate, choked sobbing. The final interview, and what it led to, was the most eventful and disturbing of all. Why? Because this interview, conducted by Dr. Rainier with Randolph Blair, was the first time that a physical item in a subject's home proved that SCP-2571 may be much more than just a malicious dream. An old VHS videotape was found in Mr. Blair's attic, with the word Cragglewood scrawled across the top. When the Foundation made Blair watch the tape and asked him if he recognized any of the images in it, he told them that he only recognized them from nightmares. He theorized that perhaps he'd been shown the tape as a child, and it had traumatized him. The Foundation didn't think that was the case. Dr. Rainier pressed on and asked him about a few strange details, like the resemblance between himself and one of the two children in the video, and the strangely vacant front-facing bedroom in his childhood home. At this point, Dr. Rainier realized that Mr. Blair wouldn't be forthcoming for much longer. He decided to use that little time he had left to ask Mr. Blair one more question. Have you always been an only child? That question would forever go unanswered, but Dr. Rainier could now take an educated guess. The Foundation watched and analyzed the tape, finding it eerily similar to so many of the dreams that came before. A young Randolph Blair and another young child that the Foundation believed to be his brother wandered through Cragglewood Park with the others until they finally reached the carousel. There, Randolph said a tearful goodbye as his brother stepped up onto the carousel, knowing somehow that he would never be seen again. And as Randolph tried to leave in a panic moments later, he was cornered by another horrifying Craggle tree, this time with his brother's face singing in his voice. Because Cragglewood Park isn't a terrifying dream, it's a terrifying memory. From the Garden of Eden to the top corner of your English teacher's desk, apples have played an equal role in history's most remarkable days and also its most mundane. The sounds of teeth snapping through the skin, sinking into flesh, and spitting out seeds echo through space forever and onward. And for most of our earthly hours consumed by appetite, it has been documented to be a lopsided relationship between these two things, man and apple. Man getting the sweet taste and abundant nutrients, apples getting nothing but pain and stomach acids. But this story is not found in our history. Buried in the lawful patterns of predator and prey, we stumble upon an irregularity, an inversion, an instance of apples biting back. SCP-4608, also known as Appleseed, was a 60-acre apple orchard containing over 22,000 trees, located just on the outskirts of Milan, Indiana. A town so small it strains your eyes as you squint to find it with a microscope, hovering just over a map. And to see what was actually happening within the curious fringes of society took even greater exploration, not just of the eyes but also of the mind. Because what would eventually be seen would not so easily be comprehended. Physical senses are just the surface, and we need to go deeper. Our story begins with a great logging company looking to take ownership of the most fertile land they could find in the Great Lakes region. Ideally land that overproduces conifer growth so that the return on their investment would be plentiful and perpetual. These lumberjacked men knew what they wanted. Beneath their red flannel shirts and muddy boots was a deep intelligence and understanding of nature. Their process of assessing the land's value was meticulously calculated. They knew the soil, both by the experience of their calloused hands and the literature of their study. They tracked various bird species migration patterns in the area to assess what kind of seeds they'd be carrying and contributing to soil by way of their stool. They understood the local laws relating to clear-cutting and conservation and how both would affect their profit margins. This is all to say, it wasn't just a speculative purchase. This was planned through and through and dwelled on. And yet, even then, with scrupulous eyes and careful crew, they missed the warning signs. SCP-4608 checked all their boxes, and then some. What could go wrong? And so they acquired the land, unwittingly purchasing the peril that came with it. On the first day of owning the property, one crew member noticed the branches did not sway in the same direction as the wind blew. He noticed the leaves didn't float down in agreement with their feathery weight, but rather crashed to the soil like two-dimensional anvils and grand pianos. The roots were not ones you simply trip over. Instead, it seemed as if they stuck their leg out to trip you. When birds perched themselves up high and sang their songs, their cadence carried all the eeriness of an SOS. With all this said, he was happy to have acquired the land, and having already picked up and moved his family from the West Coast to now live and work out in Milan, Indiana, he decided it was best to look past his concerns. After all, it was the first day on the new site, and excitement was in the air, but with it also an amorphous, anxious energy. During the first logging expedition within SCP-4608, this same member of the crew hiked the grounds to better familiarize himself with the environment he'd be working on, hoping that if he managed the land properly and extracted the lumber as efficiently as his late father did, he would be able to help build the business and give his children the life he always promised them. He brought with him his notepad and took detailed records of his surroundings. He figured to achieve his goals and sustain long-term yields, he'd have to cooperate with his environment, but he never questioned if his environment wanted to cooperate with him. Would this question have changed the course of action? Or is brooding on the preference of plants an empty gesture, best left for hippies at Woodstock? Either way, the orchard let it be known how it felt about a collaboration when hours later, the man was found dead. It was first believed by his coworkers to be a result of a safety equipment malfunction. Maybe it was a simple matter of thinking the skidder was in park when it was really in neutral. Maybe the knuckle boom loader went on the fritz, how it does when the humidity ramps up. Maybe machinery really was to blame, in which case you call it a fluke and ask no more. After all, there's only so many questions you can ask a robot. But initial belief is a fickle thing, and it wasn't long until first impressions were called into question by the courts of critical thinking. The questions of the crew, however, only rang briefly, because shortly after the first death fell a sequence of others. In a matter of days, all of the remaining crew members were declared dead or missing, a word reserved for search parties still clinging to hope, a hot potato they would have been wise to abandon. For while it was hope that brought these search parties together, it was hope that sent them off, never to be seen again. The Foundation was then alerted to the occurrences surrounding SCP-4608 by police reports accompanied by a photograph of an SCP-4608-1, an organism consisting of unidentified plant-like muscular structures and a periderm resembling those found on common hardwoods. From the photograph alone, it was clear that this 3-meter-tall organism was capable of committing the violence recently endured. Forceful in its demeanor, aggressive in its presence, and territorial in its perception, the photograph of SCP-4608-1 led to an even bigger question. Is this plant-like creature grown by nature or sown by man? After extensive research by the Foundation, records were retrieved that indicate the entirety of the 60-acre land was sown into life by John Chapman in 1826. Chapman was the type of man you could mistake for a scarecrow, both for reasons of preferred garb and body language. He was treated as such too. His personal space was respected, maybe too much. He spent his life alone, only accompanied and comforted by the things he planted. He maintained these acres all by himself until his eventual death in 1845. And it's then that it's believed SCP-4608 became unstable, reassigning its objective from comfort to chaos. When the newspaper came out the next Sunday, John Chapman's obituary painted him as a priest of the Allen County Church. But was this just the art of illusion? For as far as we know, no records of a chapel or congregation exist. A quiet choir, indeed. Come to think of it, it seems that everything within this 60-acre orchard was destined to be silenced one way or another, by violent force or even by conscious decision-making. See, while the SCP Foundation has had a long track record of subduing anomalies by methods of capture and containment, not all things are suited for locks and chains. SCP-4608 is better covered with a story than a tarp. A fruitless field that once produced at an unmanageable pace is now rendered incapable of supporting growth. Most will think it's due to a toxic spill. In truth, the spill wasn't that of chemicals on soil, but rather corpses on crops. A week after receiving the photograph of 4608-1, Site 81 sent a 3-man investigation team into Milan. Their adventure was equally abrupt, a story with no reportable beginning or middle, but simply a predictable end. After 4 days of no communication, the Foundation presumed the 3 agents no different than their steak dinner, dead meat. And only then, after the Foundation's failure to solve the case, was it understood that what we were to be looking for wasn't people at all, but rather answers to more nebulous questions. What's really happening here? And why is this happening? Following the loss of communication with the investigation team, Site 81 dispatched a high-risk response team, Mobile Strike Force Bravo 7, aka Hometown Heroes. These men had all the makings of heroes, and they were determined to prove themselves worthy of the title. While the Alpha Squad moved north towards the incident site, Beta Squad headed east, and Gamma Squad hurried west. The crews covering all directions of the compass but south, a coincidentally symbolic gesture, as if to say, we will not be taken down. The mission was simple in theory: find out what happened to the previous team and why. But alas, missions never are as easy as their objective statement reads. In practice, some might even call them impossible. As Alpha neared the incident site, they noticed the shadows on the ground beneath them did not resemble the shape of the leaves in the canopy above. They heard small drops of liquid tap, tap, tap on their helmets, yet it wasn't raining, was it? Alpha 1 ran his finger across the top of his helmet and then examined the residue left on his skin. It was raining, just not water. Oh, God! Upon looking up, he witnessed the reasons for both irregularities. Bodies hung from branches by their intestines, casting shadow puppets with their lifeless limbs. Blood dripped down like a leaky faucet. What did this? But before he could even ponder the answer, he heard a loud shriek from his radio, so loud that the radio itself vibrated, shaking its way loose from his hand and falling to the dirt. He bent down and picked it up, and this time gripped tighter, as if to tell whoever was responsible for that noise that they will not get away that easily. He and his crew followed this sound like a game of Marco Polo, blind to what may be ahead. They extended their guns and pointed them into the distant tree line, like zombie arms reaching outward in the pool towards the resonance of polo, a small comfort in a giant game of distress. As they pressed forward, Alpha Squad proceeded past all signs that pointed them back, stepping over dead bodies like puddles on a rainy day. Soon they found themselves crouching down next to human remains, attending brief and hurried funerals for all their closest comrades, torn between staying to pay respect and marching along to earn it. The chest cavities of the fallen had been ripped open and filled with apples, a grim foresight into what they were up against. But nothing they could have ever imagined would prepare them for what they were about to see, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Another loud shriek from Alpha 1's radio. It shot free from his grip and landed again in the dirt. The squad tried to ignore the metaphorical implications of this reoccurrence, quickly picking up the radio and shrugging it off, as if the 5-second rule applied equally to communication systems as candy bars. They pressed forward, maybe out of bravery, maybe out of shame of going back. And while moving through the trees, they began to notice something alarming etched on their bark. What was it? There were unnaturally deep grooves on the base of almost every one of the trees. But what exactly were they from? Scratches from an animal or beast? Infection? Decay? Their eyes drew closer, but proximity brought them no clarity. These sigils and symbols could be dated back to occult Norse religion, but in that moment, they were incomprehensible to the men. Yet the message, even if misinterpreted, was very clear. Beware. Another shrieking cry over the radio. The bullets! The bullets aren't... They're not working! They can't penetrate the bark! The grass is no greener over on the east side of the orchard, where Beta Squad gets lunged at by an SCP-4608-1. Their defenses are futile, but they fight nonetheless, sending rounds to the attacker's chest, leading to nothing. If SCP-4608 had a health meter, it wouldn't have budged in the slightest. Understanding the negligible impact of their efforts and assessing their injuries, Beta Squad scurries to retreat to an abandoned chapel, taking a brief refuge from war only later to be named. Quickly, they barricade the door. In the chapel, Beta 9 tends to Beta 6's wounds, who is in the worst shape of them all, cut, bloody, and beaten. As he lays there grimacing, he shines his flashlight up and down the chapel's walls, until he finds a reason to stop and holds it steady. Illuminated is an assortment of human skulls, and if this wasn't dramatic enough, he then spotted Appleseeds embedded in Beta 6's wounds, Appleseeds that were starting to sprout. Beta 9 gave it to him straight. This is gonna hurt. He drew his knife from his belt and lowered it into his comrade's wounds. Beta 9 dug into flesh and bone, picking the seeds out one by one. Beta 6's scream shook the chapel's stained glass windows, As Beta 1 stood guard, he saw a blur rip past him, as if life had suddenly been turned up to 3 times speed. He spun around in a circle to try and keep his eyes on it, but as his vision refocused, he saw Beta 9 was now dead. He then shifted his gaze to Beta 6, who was looking less and less human by the second. Branches began sprouting out of his body like an all-consuming magic beanstalk, out of his chest, out of his eyes, out of his mouth. And when there were no more orifices to exit, his body exploded, making way for the new form that had overtaken him. The barrage of branches broke through the windows. Only 2 of them were lucky to be on the outskirts of inertia. Outside, Gamma 1 was on his knees thanking his dead comrade for the grenade he stole from his back pocket. "I could always count on you to have my back, even in death." One hand holding a grenade and the other on his radio, Gamma 1 called off Alpha 7. "Alpha 7, request for backup rescinded. Go grab a burger. I'll take it from here." Gamma 1 slowly glanced up and locked eyes with SCP-4608-2, a large apple tree with 13 human faces embedded into it, a perennial plant with great powers, a gymnosperm that had found a voice. Blood poured from SCP-4608-2's empty eye sockets. Gamma 1 smirks. "Get some eye drops, sicko." He crawled over to the beast. The faces began yelling at him in indescribable tongues. "Let me refer you to a speech therapist," he jokes as he pulls the pin of the grenade and throws it towards the largest of the 13 mouths. SCP-4608-2 chokes on the grenade, forcing it to inhale deeply, the strength of its lungs pulling Gamma 1 toward it and sucking him in. The grenade goes off. SCP-4608-2 explodes. The surrounding trees scream and combust. The orchard goes up in flames. The bodies of the fallen are given an appropriate cremation. Gamma 1's radio lays face up in the dirt. The voice rattles it awake. It's Alpha 7. "Gamma 1! Gamma 1, are you there? Can you hear me? Please, please, it's Alpha 7. Please. Gamma 1?" On October 16th, 1947, Gamma 1 was recovered by the Allen County Fire Department, unconscious and suffering from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. The Site-81 concealment team took control of the situation and quarantined the area using the cover story of a toxic chemical hazard. The members of MTF Bravo 7 were posthumously awarded the Foundation Star for their efforts during the neutralization of SCP-4608. And so the one question that remains is, how? How did SCP-4608-1 become so dangerous? And how did its danger slip by for so many years? Is its volatility by nature, design, or consequence? Could it be that the Foundation failed to understand the complexity of this creation? During Chapman's lifetime, there were no accidents or fatalities coming from SCP-4608. Yet there is no reason to believe that SCP-4608-1 wasn't always capable of harm. Maybe it always was capable of mass murders, but simply had no reason to kill. What if the logging company never stepped foot on that land, never brought out their sharp blades and heavy machinery? What if this perilous orchard was in fact docile but provoked? What if the proverbial tree only falls in the woods when we force our philosophy on it? Though SCP-4608-2 spoke in unidentifiable sounds, the noises were always recognized and recorded as language. It spoke with intent, even if misunderstood. What it screamed is still unclear. Were they pleas for help, or messages of hate? And would one even be worse than the other? John Chapman might argue when facing heavy machinery and trained artillery, would raising your voice even be a moral decision at all? Is fight or flight imbued not just in blood, but also in bark?
It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs to To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The old man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the old man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the old man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the old man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other 2 observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the old man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the 3 observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, 2 heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms. It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night, because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his 6. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike, but to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The two officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The two of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All three observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of two of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world. So hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare, if not impossible, occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the two security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known, tried and true method of luring the old man back, tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involve wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
Let's ask a philosophical question. What is it that makes up a person's soul? Is it their personality, their memories, their emotions, the history of their good and bad deeds? Is it an energy that inhabits a living body, an active consciousness, or even all of the above? Or is the soul just an entirely nebulous and undefinable concept? The idea of the soul is almost as old as human civilization itself, with philosophers from as far back as ancient Greece and even before acknowledging its existence. Numerous religions from all over the world, if not all of them, also hold teachings about the nature of souls, even though they might vary. For example, Judaism and some denominations of Christianity state that only human beings have an immortal soul that will live on in heaven after a person's death and the end of their time on earth. Meanwhile, certain Catholic theologians, meaning people who study religion, claim that a soul inhabits all living creatures. And so the philosophical and theological debate goes on, with the general consensus being that souls are, well, they're a little bit of everything. Every part of someone that makes them who they are. Character, emotions, reasoning, consciousness, memories, and thoughts all blended together. But if we accept that a soul is something that exists, then it is something that can be altered. Is it constant, or can it be manipulated? Could a person's soul even be removed entirely? At first glance, SCP-158 appears to be a device resembling a mechanical arm. In fact, it's a lot like the kind of machine you might expect to find inside a huge factory, standing as part of an assembly line, welding and drilling components together day in and day out. This particular mechanized arm, however, features a number of unique and bizarre differences from any currently used in automated production. For starters, it has an unusual attachment at one end, a three-pronged tridactyl-like claw. The arm itself is also designed to be suspended from the ceiling, ideally hanging upside down in a room big enough to accommodate it. There is a long series of winding cables connecting SCP-158 to a complicated computer console that is used to control the device, while the remaining cables are intended to be connected to a power source. As for the console, it possesses a visual display unit and a keyboard like you might expect it to. And at the bottom, there is what appears to be some form of a dispenser, seemingly designed to attach to a container of some kind, measuring 3 inches wide by 7 inches tall. The ideal receptacle to fit the attachment is that of a glass jar or beaker. This mechanical arm was first uncovered by the Foundation in late 2007, inside a burned-down hospital in an unknown location that has been redacted from the SCP-158 file. The hospital itself was derelict, abandoned, and appeared to have been unused for a considerable period of time, approximately 5 years, but perhaps more. Agents working for the Foundation recovered SCP-158, along with an owner's manual that presumably would have contained detailed instructions describing the device's function and exactly how to operate it. This manual had been badly damaged by the fire, but the readable portions of it were later transcribed and copied, and now a single copy of what was left of the manual is kept with SCP-158 at all times. While most instructions detailing the operation of SCP-158 did survive and were able to be copied, any chapters that might have explained who built it or what it actually did were too badly damaged to read, lost to the fire. Much like the owner's manual, all components of SCP-158, the arm, the console, and the cables have all appeared to sustain some amount of fire damage, but remain intact and in full working order. The damage is only cosmetic, and while it might take around 20 minutes to boot up, this fire damage doesn't affect the machine's function. But the question still remains: what exactly is the intended purpose of this mechanical arm? Well, through a long process of trial and error, and following the surviving portions of the manual, the Foundation was able to get the device working again. They learned that SCP-158 will only perform its function when presented with an ordinary living being. While human beings, namely members of D-Class personnel, are typically used as test subjects by the Foundation, this actually applies to any living creature that has the ability to display cognition, which is the mental process of gaining knowledge in order to perform cognitive functions like thinking, remembering, and problem-solving. When a person or non-human being possessing cognition is presented to SCP-158, the machine will then go to work and extract an unknown gas-based substance from them. This substance is then deposited in the jar or beaker that is then fitted to the dispenser beneath the console. So, what does it take? Is it some sort of advanced form of decontamination device, removing all toxins and impurities from the body? Oh, if only that were true. Sadly, you see, the Foundation didn't give SCP-158 the nickname of the Soul Extractor for nothing. After the machine has performed its function, the now formerly cognitive organism on the receiving end will display a complete and total loss of their higher brain functions. They won't be able to speak, form coherent thoughts, or even remember who they were before SCP-158 was switched on. The device will rob them of any and all parts of themselves, essentially leaving the person or creature as a hollowed-out shell, a husk of their previous self, a body without a soul. Perhaps even crueler, though, is that this extraction process is not fatal, and victims are left alive afterward. They no longer possess their capability for cognitive thought, and will not respond to any form of external stimuli around them. There have been some level of brainstem activity recorded in most cases, and subjects have been known to exhibit basic reflexes, but this is the only active movement they are now capable of. As for that substance that test subjects have removed from their bodies, well, it takes the form of a gas, as we mentioned earlier, but it also seems to be comprised of a mixture of kinetic, electrical, heat, and light energy. In fact, each jar of the substance is an infinite source of these various types of energy, albeit only capable of a very low rate and output on average. The general consensus among Foundation researchers is that this substance is the physical soul that has been removed from a subject. So, do they stay stuck as soulless shells forever? Actually, SCP-158 is in fact capable of returning the extracted substance to a subject that it performed a removal on. However, whether a test subject, normally a member of D-Class, receives their soul after having it extracted is all down to whatever test is being conducted by the Foundation. Those that do get given their souls back will usually regain access to all of their previously lost cognition and higher brain functions, but the rate at which they can return can vary depending on the subject. Replacing the substance from one patient with that of another can also cause these results to differ. And again, that's if the SCP Foundation even bothers to replace a test subject's soul, instead of just leaving them hollowed out. It's actually pretty terrifying to think that the Foundation has the freedom and the capability to do that to somebody, taking away everything that makes someone a human being, only to leave their soul in a jar while their vacant body lives on without thought or consciousness. It was due to the unique anomalous function of SCP-158 that the device was proposed to become a part of a Foundation research endeavor, codenamed the Olympia Project, and overseen by its head researcher, Professor Kane Pathos Crow, who has the head of a golden retriever, but that's a story for another day. The ultimate aim of the project was to use the anomalous properties of a number of SCPs to successfully create an artificial human that would become a potential asset of the SCP Foundation. As part of one series of Olympia Project experiments, Professor Crow gathered a group of D-Class personnel to undergo testing using SCP-158. Each of these individuals had been interviewed by Crow himself, and were selected based on personality traits and characteristics that the professor liked or thought would be useful to have in the Foundation's artificial humanoid. The group chosen by Professor Crow featured a mix of male and female test subjects, as Crow believed a soul transcends the flesh it is interred in. The main purpose of the experiment was to try and uncover some of the further functions of SCP-158, basically pushing the machine to its limit, trying to learn more information about the device that would have been contained in the damaged portions of the owner's manual. Professor Crow had pored over the sections that had survived intact, making sure he knew every available piece of information on SCP-158 inside and out. The obscured instructions he was able to decipher were, according to his notes, sketchy at best and downright unhelpful at worst. Crow began his experiments by removing the first subject's soul and then trying to use the device to do literally anything else with the extracted substance. Despite trying everything he could think of, the professor learned that there was little the soul extractor could do with the soul once it had been removed, other than reverse the process and return the substance to the body it had been taken from. By then repeating this with further D-Class test subjects, Crow was able to learn the exact input sequence needed to reverse the soul extraction, whilst before this had only been ever achieved through blind luck. By his sixth experiment with SCP-158, Professor Crow noticed that there was a brief period in the middle of performing its function that the device would pause as if awaiting further commands. Crow theorized that this pause was there for additional sequences to be inputted via the machine's console. He then began removing and reimplanting the same soul into the following test subject, both to practice but also to experiment with the soul extractor's controls. The professor found it strange that, despite what he was doing to her, the D-Class suffered little to no side effects to her health, even though her soul was being continuously removed and replaced. Then, on experiment number 11, Crow seemed to crack that little pause SCP-158 took during each operation. A new list of commands appeared on the monitor like split, merge, remove aspects, add aspects, and combine aspects. It seemed to the professor that the device could be used to not only remove souls, but alter them. Through his further experiments, Crow learned that the aspects the machine mentioned were elements of a person's personality, such as willpower, understanding, conscience, creativity, empathy, and the soul extractor could be used to manipulate and rewrite a person's entire identity before placing it back into their body. However, this took a considerable amount of testing, causing Professor Crow to grow more and more frustrated with the complex workings of the device. That was until he eventually realized it wasn't SCP-158 that was too complicated for its own good. The machine was trying to quantify the unquantifiable, explain something inexplicable, the very nature of the human soul. Professor Crow began using SCP-158 to modify a composite soul, which he referred to as Subject Zero. While working on it, he realized the soul itself seemed to be aware of its surroundings, possessing a level of knowledge above that of most Foundation researchers, including Crow himself. Either by fluke or by meddling with SCP-158, the professor had created a soul that seemed to exist on several planes of existence beyond the physical world that we know. Subject Zero had become a sentient, disembodied consciousness, an entity that could see, hear, feel, and think without the need for a physical form or body to house it. Zero was proposed to become Professor Crow's assistant, given that it displayed respect and admiration to him for having created it, almost like a child looking up to a father figure. All it asked in return was to be given a name other than Subject Zero. Crow told the disembodied entity it could name itself whatever it liked. The Foundation then planned for the composite soul, now formally known as Subject Zero, to be a component of the Olympia Project's artificial humanoid, whenever its creation was successfully completed. Don't you just love a happy ending? Now go check out Living Ice Cream Van SCP-1386 and SCP-261 Pan-Dimensional Vending Machine for more peculiar, anomalous machines from the SCP Foundation.